Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents Frieren, Reincarnated as a Demon by A. Light. And if you're looking for more amazing stories, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. Your support helps turn incredible tales like this one into fully immersive audiobooks. Join me on this journey, and together, we can bring more stories to life. Thank you for being part of the adventure. Let's begin. Chapter 1, Prologue. Prologue, Reincarnation of the Demon Clan, Candidate for the Demon King. __________. Inside a dark and damp cave, the young child squatting in the corner stared at the bonfire in front of him, which made crackling sounds from time to time, but his eyes were filled with a feeling of hopelessness. If you were to ask what it feels like to be reincarnated as a beast, the current little boy, Ash, was probably feeling the same way, right? And in this strange world, there was also a terrifying race. They had no kinship relationship between parents and children, and were generally like wild beasts after birth. No, except for a very small number, wild beasts usually raised their cubs, but this race had no behavior of raising cubs at all. This growth pattern and social structure left them without much emotion and empathy, with only a few individuals showing mutual assistance and social tendencies. They did not survive by eating people, but they would kill from time to time. However, they had no motive for this, it was just a subconscious behavior. If they disliked their weaker fellows, they would ruthlessly ravage them. Their racial identity was so weak that their weak sociality was only maintained by the strongest individuals. They didn't hold hatred or disgust towards humans themselves, which made their reason for killing humans seem very strange, as if some god had created a murderous race. To human beings, this incredible race was undoubtedly the worst and most brutal race, and that was the demon race. What made the child even more unfortunate was that he was a demon. A rare hidden horn demon, meaning a demon without horns. Being born into this barbaric race with such a great disadvantage made him deeply understand from the moment he was born that weakness is the greatest original sin. If they encountered an adult demon who disliked them, they could be killed without much effort. Because of this, they needed to be self-reliant at only 3 years old. That's right, they. Ash, what are you thinking about? The pink-haired girl with 2 pairs of small horns on her forehead leaned against him, hugging her slender knees. She broke a twig in 2 and threw it into the fire. Noticing he was in a daze, she frowned. It should be your turn to cook today, right? Hurry up and get started. I'm not saying anything bad about you, Ash sighed, trying to better adapt to this world and not seem out of place. He reached out and pressed his hand on her head, speaking seriously. Aura, you shouldn't call me by my name. You should call me brother, right? Brother. What is that? The little girl, Aura, stared at him with puzzled eyes. Exhausted, Ash was too lazy to argue. Ha. Never mind, hurry up and cook. No, it's your turn to cook. Stop talking nonsense. I'm stronger now, so you cook for me. Aura was silent for a moment but eventually stood up and walked toward the bottles and jars beside the cave, as well as the half-wolf carcass meant for dinner. Muttering, she said, Ash said he'd take care of me, but in the end, I still have to work for him. Ash clearly heard Aura's words but chose to pretend he hadn't. Instead, he silently closed his eyes to meditate and practice magic. That's right, magic. Thanks to the inherited memories of the demon clan, he understood written language from birth, and even the methods of practicing magic in his own name were ingrained in him like instincts. It is precisely because of this that the demons, who can speak and walk even without parents at birth, do not die in droves, although the mortality rate in childhood is still extremely high. But magic still needs to be learned anyway. It is the pride of the demons and the foundation of their survival, it is part of their genetic instinct. This gave Ash a deep-rooted enthusiasm for it, and he would unconsciously study magic whenever he had free time. Just like other demons would choose a project to study diligently, he also had his own goal, gravity magic. Even though he had spent 3 years as a child, eating raw meat and drinking blood like a primitive man, and these childhood memories were unbearable to recall, now, he had no choice at all. At least today, he had managed to obtain a small fire source from a nearby forest, where a fire had accidentally broken out, so for the time being, he didn't have to eat raw meat. When night fell and all was silent, the two of them sat together at the entrance of the cave, leaning against each other. Before them stretched the boundless starry sky, and a spectacular meteor shower unfolded overhead. The stars streaked across the sky, leaving behind brilliant trails, so beautiful that Ash trembled. For the first time, he felt fortunate to have been born in the mountains. It's really beautiful. Is it beautiful? I don't quite understand. Aura, still wiping her hands with weeds, seemed less impressed than Ash. So, you're still just a child. We're the same age, right? I meant mentally. How much do you eat? Can we change the subject? Ash sighed, not wanting to continue the conversation. But Aura looked at him seriously and said, "That's great, Ash. Actually, I want to eat beef tomorrow. The bullhead meat I picked up last time was really delicious. Don't waste the wolf I found the day before yesterday. Besides, where do you expect me to find beef? I believe Ash will figure it out." Seeing Ash's lack of enthusiasm, Aura encouraged him instead. But her tone was so flat, so indifferent, that Ash couldn't muster any pride in it. Nodding tiredly, he said, yes, I'll try my best, but for now, let me at least finish watching the shooting stars. That wolf is already starting to stink, and it tastes awful. Don't be picky about food. Ash is so long-winded. That's my line. While half-heartedly responding to Aura, Ash gazed at the increasingly dense meteors in the sky. He remembered hearing somewhere that making wishes on shooting stars was supposed to be very effective, so he unconsciously made a wish to the stars. When I grow up, I definitely don't want to watch shooting stars with Aura anymore. Just as he silently made this vow, a series of words suddenly appeared in his sight, words he didn't recognize but somehow understood. The chosen candidate for the Demon King, Ash, accept the gift from the ancient demon god, become the king of the demons, sacrifice the world to become a new god, kill the goddess, and start a new reincarnation on this planet. This sudden message left Ash confused. According to his inherited memories, there should only be the legendary goddess of creation. When had a demon god appeared? And why did he sound like such a lunatic? Sacrificing the world. Chapter 1, The Reasons for Aura's Eccentricity. __________. The strange words that suddenly appeared before his eyes made Ash's head buzz. He couldn't quite make sense of it all, there were so many suspicious elements, but from what he gathered about the so-called Demon King growth system, he realized that this system was quite different from what he had imagined. The demon god, it turned out, was merely a self-proclaimed title of a deceased great demon from the mythological era, someone who had been on the verge of ascending to godhood. He was said to be the strongest demon king of his time. The reason Ash was chosen seemed to be because of his unique emotional qualities. He had a level of sociality and a range of emotions that were extremely rare among demons, stronger even than those of the past demon kings. This is why the system seemed to have a high evaluation of his potential, though Ash couldn't help but wonder if it was a misjudgment. After all, the system wasn't as powerful as one might expect. It didn't grant any extraordinary abilities. The only notable feature was the ability to plunder the souls of 1,000 humans, or intelligent beings with souls of equivalent worth, allowing Ash to exchange them for miracles through the system. To be precise, these miracles were replications of those granted by the goddess, stolen by the demon god. This system, carrying the ability to release miracles, was created by the demon god by replicating and stripping magic from himself. The power of the miracle would depend entirely on how many souls Ash could offer. According to the system, if enough souls were collected, it could grant miracles on par with the real thing. This meant that each wish required a minimum of 1,000 souls, with no upper limit. All accumulated souls could be spent on a single wish. Though the conditions were harsh, the bright side was that demons had exceptionally long lifespans, and even if Ash had to spend his time working in a slaughterhouse, he could eventually gather enough souls to make a wish. The system was incredibly simple, offering only this single function. At first, Ash was thrilled, but the excitement quickly gave way to frustration as he returned to the harsh reality of his situation. After all, he was just a 3-year-old child. Where could he possibly find 1,000 souls to make a wish? 13 years after his reincarnation, by a lake in the forest. The cold wind swept across the water, creating ripples as it drained Ash's body heat. With his still young body, he dragged a beast that resembled a tiger, though the size of a small car, with one hand, while gripping Aura's horn with the other. Without even turning his head, he said, "Why don't you stop researching mental magic and focus on something more practical? After I restricted this thing's movements, I was exhausted. Honestly, you're not much help. Don't tell me what to do, Ash. My magic is my own choice. Just because we were born in the same cave doesn't give you the right to interfere. You're so cold, even with a warm-hearted brother like me, Ash replied, using his gravity magic to lighten the load of both Aura and the large beast. He couldn't help but shrug at her attitude. If you call dragging me around like an object warm-hearted, then fine. But you can lie down next to me when I recover tomorrow. Aura, the pink-haired girl who looked utterly worn out and covered in dust, closed her eyes as she allowed Ash to pull her along by her horns, letting him drag her through the mud. She didn't hesitate to fire back a sharp retort. By the way, can you get up later? Will dinner be ready on time? Why am I doing that again? Isn't this a fair and democratic arrangement? I'll drag you home, and you cook. During the battle, I was the one who did most of the work. Don't be so petty between brothers and sisters. With the little energy he had left, he cut Aura off with a single sentence, causing the pink-haired lowly to click her tongue behind him. Although she was reluctant, she still lit a bonfire when they returned to the cave where they lived, the flames casting an orange glow on the stone walls. Ash sat cross-legged nearby, watching Aura's profile in the firelight, unconsciously scrutinizing her. Though she had a strange personality and was still just a lowly, she was surprisingly attractive, with a delicate face and 2 sets of devilish horns that made it easy to drag her around. The best part was that she was hardworking and capable. Even though she talked back, she was dependable in most things. The only flaw was probably, it'd be nicer if you were more docile and sweet. What are you mumbling about? Aura, stirring the pot, glanced over at him and grinned. Thinking about something weird again. I'm wondering if I should find a chance to leave this forest. To go to a human city and start eating humans instead. No, I'm not interested in human flesh. Look at me. He pointed to his head. A naked alien. If we hadn't grown up together, I would have thought you were a stupid human pretending to be a demon. Even your demon aura is so weak. If I didn't carefully check you from the outside, you'd be mistaken for a human and killed, wouldn't you? Although the topic wasn't exactly pleasant, Aura tilted her head, closed one eye, and smiled brightly. Think about it, how would it feel to eat someone exactly like you? How would you feel if I asked you to eat someone like me? That's true. It's better to just kill someone like you. Hello. Just kidding. After all, we've been together for so long. When I perfect my magic, I'll make you my slave. You'll handle everything for me, cooking, cleaning, hunting. Oh, and by the way, I hate cold water at night. You can warm my toes with your hands and lick them clean, all right? Aura seemed to revel in the thought, laughing with excitement at the mental image. But Ash paid no mind to her arrogant words. He just lowered his head, placing one hand on his forehead, wondering how the child who grew up with him had turned into such an odd person. His reaction caused Aura to misinterpret his feelings again. What? Ash, are you so happy you're embarrassed to look at me? Looking at you just makes me angry. I'm worried I might accidentally kill you, and then who would cook for me? Aura blinked in confusion before grabbing his head, shaking it playfully, and laughing happily. You're so shy. Ash, you're obviously very happy, right? Great, now he can't listen to reason at all. Is it his twisted childhood that warped his mind, or is it just in the nature of demons? Or maybe it's my fault. No, it has nothing to do with me, it's definitely one of the first two. Ash couldn't figure out why Aura thought he was shy, all while enduring the unpleasant sensation of his head being shaken. He was seriously considering whether hitting her with a heavy object could fix whatever was wrong with her brain. Chapter 2, A Family of Love and Devotion. ________. The two, loving each other, spent time together, night after night, and before they knew it, they had become wandering children and unknowingly spent another year together. In the primeval forest at noon, sunlight poured down like a waterfall, penetrating the dense treetops and falling to the ground in patches of golden light. The air in the forest seemed to be slightly warmed by the sun, carrying the fragrance of grass and trees, the scent of moist earth, and also, a strong smell of blood. More than a dozen wolf corpses were scattered throughout the jungle, with wooden spears piercing through their bodies, as if fired from siege crossbows. After using gravity magic combined with spears to clear out a large number of wild wolves that were immobilized by Aura's mind control from the treetops, Ash continued to use gravity to suppress the last wolf, at Aura's request. The only survivor, whose movements were restricted, had a fierce look in its eyes, and its silver fur gleamed in the sunlight. Though terrified of the two monsters, the wolf kept growling lowly in its throat despite being held down. However, before it could pose any further threat, Aura, whose magic had roughly taken form, conjured an exquisite small scale using magic. Now, let's see who's stronger, you or me. Aura pointed the scale at the wolf with great momentum. But just after speaking, she glanced at the boy next to him and added, Ash. If the scale tips towards me, kill the wolf immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, before Ash could respond, the balance quickly tilted toward the wolf. The once whimpering creature gradually stopped struggling and lay on the ground obediently, motionless. This is. Before Ash could finish, Aura squatted beside him, staring at the wolf without raising her head, and said, Let it go, Ash. It's already my pet. I see. Did you succeed in your research on mind control magic? What does that scale do? Good question. Aura suddenly stood up, pointed the scale at him, and smiled mischievously. Ash, how about you try it yourself? That's more convenient than any explanation, isn't it? No, you just want to use me as an experiment, don't you? Ash instinctively took a few steps back, keeping a wary eye on both Aura and the wolf. Don't you always say you're my big brother? If that's the case, you should be willing to use your body to experience the essence of my life's work, right? It's okay, I'll take great care of you. No, wait, it should be your turn to take care of me. Time for you to cook for me. Thinking back on all the times he'd broken the rules and always made her accommodate his needs, Aura became more and more excited, sensing a rare opportunity, feeling like a serf rising up to become master of their own destiny. However, what you're saying makes sense, but I refuse. As the pink-haired lowly approached step by step, Ash's expression shifted to a smile, and he suddenly raised his hand, taking the initiative. An abnormal surge of gravity shot through Aura's body, distorting her expression and causing the scale in her hand to drop. She nearly collapsed to her knees. But she forced a smile. The injured wolf beside her, as if receiving an unseen command, suddenly leapt toward Ash, attempting to knock him down. At that moment, Ash looked up. Boom. A shockwave spread from his position. The fallen leaves scattered in the air, and the wolf that had lunged at Ash flew back before reaching him. Even the pink-haired lowly, standing 3 meters away, was knocked to the ground by the force, staring at him in disbelief. What? This shouldn't happen. Isn't your magic only effective on a single target? Do you think I'm stupid enough to reveal all my secrets to my dearest sister? Ash, breathing a little heavily, grabbed her horns and lifted her up. Leaning slightly forward, he pressed his forehead against hers, a sneering smile forming on his face. Tell me, Aura, how should I punish you for your betrayal? What are you talking about, Ash? Aren't we a loving family? Yes, we are a loving family, Ash nodded gently, but then his expression grew cold. Which is why betrayal can't be easily forgiven, right? I just thought you were being too harsh on me, so I wanted a little revenge. It's just the playful and willful behavior of a cute little sister, okay? Oh, what a cute little troublemaker. He shrugged indifferently, showing no further dissatisfaction. He simply grabbed Aura by the horns and started walking toward the cave where they lived. Without turning his head, he ordered her to tell the wolf to take its pack back with it. Aura, accustomed to this treatment, obediently complied but couldn't help muttering, at least change the gravity. My pants will be worn out before we even get back. Don't worry, I'll find a way to get you new ones. But I'll still give your behind some attention on the way back to the cave. You just want to see me walking around naked in front of you, don't you? You're such a pervert, Ash, even though you call yourself my brother. It's fine. I've already figured out that demons only give birth to one child at a time. I'm just your brother. Ash dragged Aura along, his face expressionless, unmoved by her bizarre comment. Aura, tapping her chin thoughtfully with her slender white fingers, tilted her head in confusion. Even from a common-sense perspective, that statement sounds pretty weird, doesn't it? From a demon's perspective, there's nothing strange about it. No, actually, from a demon's perspective, you should have killed me by now, right? Which is why you should praise my generosity. While nonchalantly dealing with Aura on their way back to the cave, Ash couldn't help but glance repeatedly at the wolf dragging its dead companions by the teeth, rather than paying attention to the sister he was hauling along. Aura's cute and willful behavior no longer surprised him, but the wolf's alternating docility and occasional baring of its teeth felt off to Ash. Just as he was about to question it, the wolf suddenly lunged at him, knocking him to the ground from behind and sinking its teeth into his neck. Blood splattered everywhere, and Ash's face twisted in pain. "Hey! What are you doing? Stop it!" Aura cried out in panic, startled by the sudden attack. Her intention had only been to reverse the dynamic with Ash and make him care for her, not to kill him. But the wolf, like a beast that had broken free from its chains, ignored her commands, biting into Ash's neck with savage force. At the height of this tense moment, another shockwave of repulsive force suddenly surged through the air. The wolf, with blood and flesh hanging from its jaws, was flung over 2 meters high without resistance. Then, Ash, still bleeding, grabbed Aura, who was nearly swept away by the aftermath, and positioned her in front of him. With a sickening puff, he yanked her sharp horns and drove them directly into the wolf's belly, causing its blood and entrails to explode outward, splattering across Aura's face. The pink-haired lowly was instantly drenched in blood, her entire body soaked as the wolf's remains gushed over her. Chapter 3: Daily Torture of Each Other. Aura's horns pierced through the wolf's soft abdomen, causing the wolf to whimper pitifully in pain. It also kept kicking and struggling, causing blood to splatter continuously. But after a while, the out-of-control wolf finally died completely. Aura, who was unable to raise her head with the wolf's corpse on her horns, stood in stunned silence for a long time before she sighed deeply, staring ahead with a depressed expression. "Are you being polite? What do you take me for? I want to ask you what you are doing." Ash, feeling the blood flowing down his neck and all over his body, asked irritably, "Do you really want to be an orphan? If I were an ordinary human, I'd be dead right now, wouldn't I? You may not believe this, but it really wasn't me this time. I can see that, and I felt from the beginning that your control was slipping. Well, it does need some improvement. So, how about you handle it for me?" Aura said seriously, showing an unprecedented serious expression. "Don't worry, I won't really take control. And when my magic is perfect, I'll definitely repay you." Aura. Brother. The two of them locked eyes, with a sense of sibling affection hanging between them. At that moment, the corners of Aura's mouth seemed like they were about to curl up into a smile, but... "Keep dreaming." Ash lightly slapped her face and pushed her gently. Unbalanced by the wolf corpse on her horns, Aura lost her balance and fell backward. "TSK, it still doesn't work." "Just Ash, you're quite sharp." Aura, lying on her back, clicked her tongue in dissatisfaction, staring up at the treetops in deep thought. Whether she was thinking about how to improve her magic or how to deceive Ash remained unknown. But Ash also understood the drawbacks of being self-taught, something that was especially true for demons. His progress in exploring magic on his own had been slow, and the occasional mistake was to be expected. However, at the moment, he wasn't focused on that. Instead, he squatted beside Aura, looking down at the girl who showed no sign of remorse. "Aura, don't you think there's something you need to tell me? I almost forgot. Ash, could you move this corpse off my head? My neck feels like it's about to snap." "That's not what I meant. A little blood on your neck won't kill you, so why worry about it? For us demons, we won't die from losing blood. We'll just get weaker." Aura smiled slyly, covering her mouth with her hands. In Ash's opinion, it was the kind of smile that begged for a punch. His eye twitched as he barely managed to hold back his temper. Aura, noticing that Ash was on the verge of exploding, quickly raised her hands in surrender. All right, don't get so mad. I know I messed up. I'll do better next time. And I'll even make you something nice to eat tonight, okay? Is this really the sincerity of your apology? Doesn't your attitude seem a little off? Ash, think about it, Aura continued, reasoning with him. When my magic is fully developed, we won't have to hunt for food anymore. You could just sit at home and wait for others to bring it to you. Doesn't that sound nice? Now, can you please help me get this thing off? My horns seem to be stuck in the bone, and I can't free myself. Aura rolled on the ground, trying to pull the wolf off his head, but her two horns were stuck in its ribs. She was forced to sit up with the wolf's body still on her horns, looking at Ash with an awkward but polite smile. He glanced at the blood-covered figure in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the wolf corpse beside him. "Actually, you could just leave it like this, it'll save me some energy." "Hey! Isn't this a bit weird? I was just kidding, but now." As Ash said this, he turned his hand, conjuring a fireball in his palm. He picked up a branch from the ground and heated it until it glowed red before handing it to Aura. "Help me stop the bleeding first." "Oh, I'm good at this. Leave it to me." Aura, who had been quite depressed, suddenly jumped up, the wolf's corpse still stuck on her head, and took the burning stick from Ash. She pressed it against his neck without hesitation. With a sharp sizzle of searing flesh, the smell of burning meat filled the air. Ash gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead, while Aura shouted excitedly, "This is great." "Ash! Are you shaking?" "I'm so excited my fingers are shaking." "You're excited, aren't you?" Ash cursed as Aura's strange enthusiasm became too much to bear. "I told you to study healing magic ages ago. Why didn't you do it? You waste all your time on mental research, and now every time we get hurt, we have to torture each other like this. Are you a masochist and a sadist? How could that be? I don't like pain, I just like seeing you tremble. This is really great. I don't want to study healing magic. Isn't this better? And what about when you're hurt? No way. No matter what, my answer is still no. Healing magic is too troublesome. You don't even want to study it yourself, you just want me to so you can bully me for the rest of my life. I'm not that stupid. Besides, isn't this way more fun?" Aura's voice, completely unashamed of her excitement, left Ash speechless. His lips twitched as he silently vowed to give her a proper spanking when they got back home. However, at this point, Ash had basically abandoned the idea of having Aura study healing magic. He couldn't do it himself, and it was obvious Aura had no desire to learn it either. Even if she got injured and had to cauterize the wound with a burning stick, she wouldn't change her research focus that easily. Fortunately, thanks to their demon physiology, they didn't have to worry about infections or diseases. The only real danger was the smell of blood attracting monsters or wild beasts. Even though they were demons, they couldn't communicate with monsters and might even be attacked by them, just as demons sometimes fought and killed each other. At the moment, though, Ash was overwhelmed by pain, while Aura's excitement only grew. Her heavy breathing filled the air, making him lament the wild and unpredictable nature of demons. At the same time, he couldn't believe that this bizarre situation was the result of his own teachings. After all, he'd once been an innocent child, as pure as a blank slate, or so he liked to think. Chapter 4, Show some respect to your brother, asshole. Ash felt quite helpless about the current situation, where he was forced to rely on folk remedies to treat his injuries. Yet, he could only be thankful that demons had sturdy physiques and just bear with it for the time being. Fortunately, I've been enduring this since I was young, so maybe I'll get used to it. Although I'm used to this sort of thing, it's still pretty annoying. As Ash sat by the river, washing the blood off his body, he felt frustrated with his current circumstances, even though he had come to accept the reality. In front of him, Aura, with her back to him, soaked in the water to wash away the blood. She shook her long pink hair freely and sighed. "Hey, Ash, can you stop saying such annoying things behind people's backs? I think my figure is actually pretty good, don't you think? Stop spouting nonsense. Your figure, well, it's hard for me to judge." Ash was still staring at the bloodstains in the water, but subconsciously raised his head to glance at the lowly performing a wet and seductive act nearby. She was only 14 years old and still quite small, but there were hints of growth, which made him wonder about how she would mature in the future. Though he'd watched her grow up, Ash now had the strong urge to kick her as she twisted her hips in the water, sending her to the bottom of the river to drink some water. But since he was always bullying and ordering her around, he figured he should treat her a bit better from time to time. With that thought, he turned his eyes away, deciding to stop paying attention to the irritating girl. This is... Aura noticed his action and couldn't help but put a finger to her lips, tilting her head in thought. After a moment, a bright smile lit up her face. "I get it. You're feeling shy, aren't you?" Yes, I'm shy. They say demons are cold and selfish. This one is definitely selfish, but why are her emotions so blatant? If I can take credit for anything, it should be her behavior, right? Because I've influenced her in ways most demons wouldn't. Ash rubbed his forehead, trying to think about anything else rather than teaching her a lesson. He felt so proud of himself, even crediting her changes to his education. But I really don't understand how I ended up teaching such an infuriating creature. Look, Ash, you always make harsh comments about me every now and then. Do you secretly hate me? How could that be? You're my favorite sister. Really? Then why don't you show any expression? Is this how you're supposed to talk to your lover? Aura walked out of the water and leaned in, observing Ash closely as he read with an expressionless face, clearly puzzled. Unfortunately, Ash had no intention of humoring her. He didn't even want to react to her odd lover comment. Instead, he washed his hands in the cold river, stood up, and headed back toward the bushes he had come from, without bothering to look back. Have you finished washing? If you have, let's go back. Otherwise, the meat will get taken by wild beasts or monsters. Geez, Ash, you're really boring. Show some respect to your brother, idiot. I want to be respectful, but you don't show enough consideration and love for your sister. Besides, who calls their beloved sister a thing and an idiot? Actually, all humans do. Huh? Really? Aura looked genuinely surprised as she subconsciously followed him, deep in thought. Humans are so barbaric. Ash, you're a demon, why would you learn from such barbaric people? What should I do? She actually believes that. Should I tell her the truth? Nah, this is too funny. I'll just leave it for now. Ash walked ahead, covering his face for a moment, deciding to drop the matter. Anyway, it's not that important. Better not to take it too seriously. If something goes wrong, I can figure out a solution later. Ash and his eccentric sister spent another year living peacefully together in the vast forest. Aura, though lacking in combat ability, with the help of Ash and their controlled beasts and monsters, managed to build a servant army of nearly 100 at an impressive snowballing speed. Over the years, the two of them, having already mapped out most of the forest, traveled through the dense jungle and soon arrived at a human village nestled near the mountains. There was almost no resistance. The controlled servants occupied the village with overwhelming force, practically without any bloodshed. Looking at the trembling villagers gathered in the center of the village, Aura proudly declared without any hesitation. From today onwards, we are your masters. And starting today, you'll cook for us. Ash added, voicing his current biggest wish. This left Aura momentarily speechless. Ash, isn't that a little too idealistic? Shouldn't you be killing them, as usual? What are you talking about? Isn't it better to have someone cook for us? Or do you want to do all the cooking yourself? Fine, I guess we should keep them. Even though they're barbaric humans, they still have some use. Although her instinct was to kill, the prospect of not having to do the work herself, and recalling how Ash had constantly ordered her around over the years, made her suppress her instinct quickly. When the villagers saw the demons leading a large group of beasts and monsters, about a dozen hunters tried to resist. But Ash simply raised his hand, creating a gravitational force that pinned them to the ground. The others quickly gave up any hope of fighting back. However, the conversation between Ash and Aura offered the villagers a glimmer of hope, and Ash stood up once more, speaking to them at the right moment. Don't worry, everyone. We're good people. No, wait, we're good demons. Actually, Anyway, we're not bad. By the way, how do humans in this world perceive demons? Ash mused, watching the people below. Although his system allowed him to grow stronger through killing, the exact nature of its power was still puzzling. Moreover, if he went around slaughtering people carelessly, he'd probably be labeled a demon king. He wasn't fond of killing innocent people unnecessarily, so for now, he opted to develop gradually. It wasn't that the idea of violence was completely off the table, but he preferred to pace himself, knowing it was smarter to grow his power slowly rather than draw unwanted attention. Chapter 5, Taking Over the Human Village. The villagers were skeptical about Ash, the men who had suddenly appeared leading a large number of monsters and beasts to besiege the village. They found it hard to believe what he said, especially since he was mingling with demons and claimed to be a human of the demon clan. In terms of appearance, Ash looked completely human, without any of the characteristic horns of a demon, making it difficult to distinguish between the two. Unless you were a magician with a deep understanding of demons and could judge by their aura, it was practically impossible for ordinary humans to tell the difference. Ash noticed this as well and briefly thought it might have been more convenient to just say he was human. However, with Aura standing next to him, it seemed better to be honest from the start than risk exposing himself later and destroying any trust. So, he spread his hands and said with a sigh, "Don't judge a person by their appearance. I am actually a demon. However, we have no intention of killing anyone, so I hope you'll cooperate with us." "You mean, cooperation?" came a voice from the crowd. An old man, presumably the village chief, stepped forward. "Yes," Ash replied. "As long as you take care of us, we'll protect you from monsters and wild beasts." "How does that sound? For a village on the edge of the forest, it's a pretty good deal, right?" "Really? Is that all?" The old man remained skeptical. "You'll find out soon enough. But of course, you're not allowed to leave here or go to other villages." Actions speak louder than words, Ash thought, so instead of explaining further, he forced the villagers into cooperating. The villagers, still trembling, led them to the best house in the village. Soon after, under the supervision of the monsters, food was served. On the table were cheese, bread, soup made with milk, roasted meat dripping with fat, and the sweet aroma of roasted chestnuts. The smell alone was enough to stir the appetites of Ash and Aura, who had lived like savages in the mountains. They exchanged a glance before silently agreeing to dive in, fighting for the food without hesitation, ignoring any prior sense of friendship or decorum. They didn't worry about being poisoned. From their knowledge, ordinary poisons didn't work on demons. Even if there were poisons that could, it was highly unlikely a village like this one possessed such a thing. After the meal, the delicious food swayed Aura's judgment entirely. She decided to trust Ash's plan and agreed to settle here with him. At first, the villagers lived in a state of constant panic. But with the assistance of monsters and wild beasts, the success rate of hunting expeditions soared, while the risk of injuries dropped dramatically. Just as Ash had said, they no longer had to fear external threats. The controlled monsters and beasts even helped with farming, significantly improving the villagers' productivity and allowing them to cultivate new fields. In the winter of the first year, for the first time, no one starved to death in this poor border village. This quickly shifted the villagers' mentality, and by the third year, they had built stone statues of Ash and Aura, honoring them as patron saints. However, to avoid being labeled as heretics, they silently removed Aura's horns from the statues. With the support of the villagers, Ash and Aura were able to focus on studying magic while enjoying delicious meals every day. By the end of the first year, they relaxed the strict rules they had initially imposed. The village chief and several villagers, who had voluntarily accepted control, were allowed to move freely and purchase goods outside the village. Aura had cast obedience magic on them, ensuring they couldn't betray her. In practice, however, the only command they had to follow was to commit suicide if they betrayed Ash and Aura. Unless they received additional orders, their daily activities remained exactly the same as before, with the exception that they couldn't disobey Aura's commands or act against them. For the average villager, the difference between a life of adequate food and shelter with some spiritual constraints, versus the freedom to starve to death alongside their families, wasn't much of a dilemma. They chose the former without hesitation. Despite the semblance of shackles, this life was an improvement over their previous one. In the Middle Ages, hunger and even starvation were common in poor border villages like theirs. The kingdom they were in was still at war with neighboring countries, and heavy taxes were a constant burden. Through this human village, Ash began to understand the structure of the world they lived in. They were in the southern countries, far from the northern continent where the demon's stronghold was located. Because of this distance, demons here were few and far between, and the threat they posed was minimal. This, however, led to constant wars between the southern nations. Each country sought to conquer the other, but no one could succeed, resulting in frequent, bitter conflicts. It was due to this war that 2 orphans, fleeing the violence, had ended up in this remote village. It was these 2 war orphans who provided Ash with valuable information about the outside world. No matter which world humans live in, they always seem to like killing each other, don't they? Ash, musing during his spare time while practicing magic, lamented the state of the world. But he quickly pushed these dreary philosophical thoughts aside. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the wheat fields surrounding the village. As the wind swept across the land, the wheat moved like waves in a golden ocean, rolling gently in the breeze. Everything around him was peaceful, remarkably so, considering they were in a border village in a war-torn land. The tranquility made him feel almost lazy. Lying down on the grass at the edge of the village, Ash leaned against a tree trunk, closed his eyes, and tried to take a nap. But before he could fully drift off, a hesitant, elderly voice interrupted his daze. "Master Ash, it's almost time for dinner, and Master Aura is still in her room. Today marks the 3rd day. Shouldn't you check on her?" "It's fine," Ash replied. "A demon won't starve to death in just 3 days. She's probably focused on studying magic." He turned to see the elderly village chief standing nearby, his face filled with hesitation, as if there was something he wanted to say but couldn't quite express. Ash found the concern humans had for demons oddly amusing. But it wasn't entirely surprising. After all, they had reached a mutual understanding with the village. For now, neither side could afford to part from the other. The villagers had come to rely on them, especially on Aura. Chapter 6, The Broken Routine. ____. Ash's nonchalant response made it clear he wasn't concerned about Aura, leaving the old village chief bewildered. The chief stood there, unsure of what to say. But Ash paid little attention to the chief's confusion. He stood up and walked toward the village, not even glancing back. "Don't worry too much. That girl will come out if she's really hungry." "Is that so?" the chief asked, still uncertain. "Yeah, that's it," Ash replied with a shrug, offering no further explanation as he headed toward the room the villagers had built for him and Aura the previous year. Along the way, villagers greeted him warmly with smiles. Inside the house, food had already been placed on the dining table. The middle-aged woman responsible for cooking was just about to leave, but when she saw Ash, she smiled and nodded. "The weather's getting colder lately. Master Ash, Master Aura, you should enjoy it while it's hot." "Thanks," Ash responded with a slight nod. He sat at the table and began eating his meal in silence. He didn't bother calling Aura. After all, she would get irritated if disturbed. The meal was simple: rough bread, homemade cheese, freshly roasted meat, and fresh vegetables. It wasn't anything special, but it was a significant improvement from the savage life they'd lived in the past. Ash ate quietly, his face expressionless, but his eyes reflected a sense of contentment. He seemed satisfied with the current situation. However, as he enjoyed his peaceful meal, dusk quietly spread through the room, casting a sense of unease, like the calm before a storm. Outside, a gentle breeze began to blow, rustling the leaves, as if nature itself was whispering something ominous. Ash was well aware that problems would inevitably arise from the coexistence of humans and demons, but when those problems would manifest, no one could say. For now, he pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to immerse himself in the quiet, enjoying this brief moment of peace. But the problem he had been dreading arrived one late autumn afternoon. It wasn't quite what he had expected, though. That afternoon, the sunlight was soft and warm, carrying a slight chill in the air. The sky was a deep, brilliant blue, with a few white clouds drifting lazily by. In the distance, farmers were busy with the harvest, while nearby, cows and sheep grazed leisurely. Occasionally, the chirping of birds and insects filled the air. Everything was so peaceful that Ash couldn't resist lying down on a stack of wheat, basking in the sunlight, drifting into a nap. However, just as he was dozing off, he felt a sharp kick on his shoulder. When he opened his eyes, he saw Aura standing over him. Now 18, she hadn't changed much from her younger years. She frowned down at him, her expression serious. "Don't sleep." "Something's wrong," she said. Ash groaned, still half asleep. "What do you mean?" "The demon wolf that was working with the hunter, it's been killed." "Yeah," Ash replied, still processing the information. He sat up from the ground, unsure whether the cause of the disturbance was human, monster, or the work of demons. The wind, carrying the scent of wheat and flowers, also seemed to bear the faint smell of blood. His ears quickly picked up the distant sound of horse hooves and panicked shouts, prompting him to stand and face the direction of the commotion. Not far away, a group of cavalrymen, their weapons stained with blood, galloped in from a field. Judging by their flag, they were soldiers of the kingdom of Telton, enemies of the kingdom of Tad, where they now stood. The cavalry, fully armed, had been patrolling the borders in a guerrilla manner, defending against wild beasts from the surrounding forests. Now, however, they had launched a surprise attack. On the spear of the lead cavalryman was the familiar body of Julius, a young hunter and war orphan who, like many, had fled here to escape the ravages of war. He had only recently begun his journey as a hunter. You've always wanted to escape the war, yet even now, you cannot escape it. How pitiful. Ash narrowed his eyes slightly and let out a calm sigh. He took the sword that the village chief handed him, the man's hands trembling as he did so. Unlike Ash, the village chief was visibly anxious and panicked. Master Ash, please, protect us, he pleaded desperately. I can only do my best, Ash replied quietly. In the brutal wars of the Middle Ages, there was essentially no bottom line. Of course, war in general rarely had one, but in this era, the lack of restraint was even more glaring. Victorious armies frequently indulged in rape, looting, and massacres. Massacring border villages created terror, disrupted the enemy's economy, and weakened their will to fight, making it a common tactic. Soldiers often found a disturbing kind of satisfaction in such acts. None of this was particularly surprising, but the presence of demons and other foreign creatures in the village made the situation more dramatic and unexpected. Why are there demons in this village? And why so many monsters? Muttered the officer leading the cavalry sweep, visibly displeased as he noticed the demons and wild beasts on the edge of the village, along with Aura standing right next to Ash. The magician beside him glanced at the magical presence of the men standing in the village. Sensing the faint magical energy, he smirked smugly. Don't worry, Lord Maynard. That demon and the magician next to him seem inexperienced. The monsters are nothing special, just average creatures for this area. We'll overwhelm them easily with numbers. Are the demons keeping humans captive, or are humans keeping the demons captive? The cavalry commander, known as Maynard, murmured absently. He didn't dwell on the matter for long. Swinging his sword down in a decisive gesture, he shouted, "Kill them all. Devour them," Aura commanded coldly. Having experienced many battles in the forest, Aura showed no fear. Her voice was steady as she ordered her puppets into action. The cavalry's iron hooves trampled the fields, kicking up a cloud of dust as they charged. In response to Aura's command, the beasts near the village surged forward in a massive wave, rushing to meet the cavalry head-on. Chapter 7, The First Bloody Battle. As the cavalry and beasts charged toward each other, chaos erupted among the villagers. Some scrambled to find weapons in a desperate attempt to help, while others fled in a panic. Aura, however, paid them no mind. Whether they won or lost, they wouldn't be able to stay here any longer. She simply watched the puppets lunging forward and frowned. Hey, Ash, why am I fighting humans to protect them? Normally, I'd just run away, right? Don't bother me, Aura. I'm thinking about that too. Ash had only wanted to live a peaceful life, yet here he was, caught up in a human war. The absurdity of the situation left him helpless, forcing him to hold his forehead and sigh. Life was full of unwanted surprises. Even though Aura had a point, he couldn't just walk away. After all, they had lived here for several years. As they spoke, the village filled with the sounds of battle, wails, screams, and war cries echoed in the air, mingling with the ever-present smell of blood. It was like a scene from a battlefield. Ash raised one hand silently, and in that instant, the air seemed to freeze. The blood that had been spraying through the air abruptly changed direction and fell in straight lines. The knights, who had been dominating the fight against the beasts with their sturdy, enchanted armor, suddenly found their horses collapsing beneath them in clouds of dust, unable to support the weight. Though the change in gravity's range was subtle, it had a surprising effect on the horses carrying heavily armored riders during their charge. The unarmored villagers seized the moment. With heavy steps, they rushed forward, wielding simple weapons, thrusting them into the gaps in the knight's armor. The smaller beasts, also affected, attacked the knight's helmets. In an instant, the air was filled with human screams. Compared to his men, however, Maynard, the captain of the elite cavalry who had infiltrated enemy territory, reacted swiftly. As his horse collapsed, he rolled and stabilized himself in a half-kneeling stance. Ah! Ah! Trembling, a villager charged at him with a hoe raised high. Maynard merely raised his hand and severed the hoe with a swift strike, then swung his sword backhandedly, effortlessly cutting the villager in half. He's really strong, but we still need to deal with him. Despite witnessing the death of an acquaintance, Ash remained unmoved. He simply grabbed the best sword available in the village and quickly advanced. Maynard noticed and took up a fighting stance, ready for close combat. He had donned armor even while on horseback to protect himself from potential arrows. The mage, now pinned by the pressure of Ash's magic, struggled to remove his helmet and undo his gauntlets. At that moment, Ash suddenly stopped, twisting his waist slightly to gather strength. He then cancelled the magic and threw the sword. Propelled by a repulsive force, the sword flew faster than expected. Maynard instinctively raised his hand to block it but froze in place. The sword whirred as it spun past Maynard with a sharp whoosh, burying itself directly into the forehead of the military mage who had just removed his helmet. Blood spattered, and the mage looked up in blank confusion, not even comprehending how he had died, before collapsing with his head tilted back. Maynard turned around, dumbfounded, as his mask was instantly stained with his companion's blood. His face twisted in fury, veins bulging. "You bastard!" Ash, still calm, responded, "You're fighting me in armor, heavy armor that's extra thick. Which means I have the advantage this time." He pressed his hand forward, concentrating his magic to intensify the gravity around Maynard. Maynard's feet sank into the ground, and his body bent under the increasing pressure. He struggled to stay upright, forced to plant his sword into the earth to support himself and prevent a complete collapse. Ash, satisfied, nodded and reached for a thin, sharp armor-piercing cone from his waist. In this world, many soldiers wear heavy armor, so this tool is unexpectedly useful. I haven't had a chance to use it before, but today, it's exactly what I need. Don't worry. I'll end your life quickly. He gestured toward Maynard's exposed neck, preparing to strike. Ash was well practiced in the routine, using magic to suppress his opponent and then finishing them off with a decisive blow. But just as he was about to thrust the cone into Maynard's neck, his hand suddenly felt empty. The armor-piercing cone had been snatched away in an instant, and before Ash could even register what had happened, the cone was already driven into his own neck. The speed was beyond his comprehension, leaving him no time to react. Aura, watching from a distance, gasped in disbelief. Impossible. This man's not normal. Wearing heavy armor, and under intense gravity, how can he move so fast? It was at that moment Ash, inexperienced in direct combat with skilled opponents, realized he'd been completely outmaneuvered. As a magician, Ash should have kept his distance. But unlike other demons, his battle experience was lacking. He often relied on tricks or weapons to win, much like how he'd managed to kill the military wizard earlier. Now, though, his throat was pierced, and he couldn't utter a sound. Blood bubbled from his mouth as he collapsed to the ground, the noise of his struggling breath like the hiss of broken machinery. Ash's eyes widened as he stared at Maynard, who casually retrieved his sword from the dirt. Through the helmet's slit, Maynard grinned maliciously and raised his sword high. "You thought you could trap me with such simple magic? You're too young and inexperienced to face me." The scene was unmistakably one of Ash's defeat, and even though he tried to rise, his body refused to obey. As a demon, he was still a child, he hadn't grown fully, nor had he developed enough to face such overwhelming danger. This was his first true brush with death, and it filled him with despair. But just as Maynard's sword began its downward arc to finish Ash off, a massive demon bull charged out of nowhere, crashing into Maynard with a thunderous bang. Caught completely off guard, Maynard was sent flying through the air, slamming into a nearby house with a forceful crash. Gaga. A low-level beast dares attack me. Maynard should have been able to counter the bull's charge, but the combined effects of his heavy armor and the gravity magic had left him vulnerable. Enraged, he struggled to his feet, ready to confront the charging beast once more. His hands outstretched, he prepared to seize the enormous creature, now barreling toward him again. At that exact moment, the magic binding Maynard suddenly vanished. He wasn't prepared for the sudden change in gravity, and the demon bull slammed into him again, this time knocking him straight into a stone wall. The impact created a massive hole, and Maynard's body disappeared into the debris, his fate unknown. Meanwhile, the battlefield, now free of Ash's gravity magic, became even more chaotic. The injured cavalryman, sensing an opportunity, fought desperately against the beasts and villagers who had risen up in rebellion. The air was filled with the sound of clashing weapons, feral growls, and desperate shouts. However, the violence didn't last long. Slowly, the battlefield began to quiet, and the village returned to a tense, eerie calm. Chapter 8, Leaving After a Pitiful Victory. ________. Beneath a sky painted blood-red by the setting sun, the battlefield was strewn with bodies. Despite Ash's earlier use of gravity magic, the beasts had been slaughtered the moment the magic vanished, and the young, strong villagers lay scattered across the ground. However, the elite light cavalry, who should have easily massacred the village, had been reduced to only 3 men in the blink of an eye. The remaining cavalrymen, covered in blood and clearly wounded, wore damaged armor. Their expressions were grim. "It's just a village, and it turned out like this." Maynard, the captain of the elite cavalry, shook his head in disbelief. His eyes settled on the old, weak, and injured villagers, among them Aura, who looked troubled and clearly had no fight left in her. Gripping his sword, Maynard marched forward, fury in his voice. "You damned demons! Just die already." "Who?" A faint breath, untimely yet easily overlooked in the chaos of the battlefield, echoed softly. Ash, whose neck had been pierced by an armor-piercing spike and should have been dead, stood up again, silently and without fanfare. The sun's fading light cast a long shadow behind him as he approached Maynard from behind, like a phantom waiting for the right moment. With a quick motion, Ash pulled the spike from his own neck, blood splattering in its wake. Without hesitation, and before Maynard could sense the danger, Ash drove the spike into the gap in the captain's armor at the neck. Gah! Maynard's eyes widened in shock as fear and despair finally washed over him. He couldn't even turn to face his killer. Blood gushed from his neck, and his strength left him, causing him to collapse to the ground. From behind him came a chilling whisper, as though it had risen from the depths of hell. "You still don't understand demons, or me. This level of injury won't kill me." "Maynard," gasped one of the remaining soldiers. "Captain," the other cried out in disbelief. Ash, standing over Maynard's body, pressed his foot against the captain's shoulder, using the leverage to yank the spike out. Maynard's lifeless form slumped to the ground. "How dare you? You bastard!" The 2 remaining cavalrymen, filled with rage, raised their swords, ready to strike Ash down to avenge their fallen captain. But Ash merely glanced at them, raising his hand slightly. Once more, the abnormal gravity took hold of their bodies, and the 2 men, already exhausted, both physically and mentally, were forced to their knees, their heavy armor crushing them beneath the increased weight. Ash wasted no time. He repeated his previous actions, ignoring their desperate curses and pleas, driving the armor-piercing spike into the gaps in their armor, swiftly ending their lives. When it was done, the battlefield was quiet. Ash, now soaked in blood, sat on the back of one of the fallen cavalrymen, releasing a deep sigh. Why? Why am I doing this in the midst of humanity's internal conflicts? Aura stepped forward from the crowd, crouching in front of him, her hands propping up her chin as she grinned mischievously. "But this world is quite interesting, isn't it?" "Maybe." Ash didn't respond to her directly. Instead, he lowered his head, staring at his blood-covered hands, letting his thoughts drift far away from the battlefield. It was Ash's first time killing someone, yet for some reason, he didn't feel any fear or hesitation. Was it the demon instinct within him? Or had the years of fighting and bloodshed numbed him to it? He couldn't quite understand what was happening to him. Although the village had won the battle, no one felt any joy. A deep sorrow hung over the entire place. Death had touched every household, and under the village chief's orders, the villagers gathered their courage to deal with the bodies scattered across the ground. They also prepared to sell the armor and weapons of the fallen cavalrymen in a few days. Ash stood watching the busy villagers, absent-mindedly touching the bandage wrapped around his neck. His thoughts drifted to when he should leave. Aura, who had been silently observing him with a mischievous smile, toyed with a scale in her hand and spoke slowly. "Tell me, if I use obedience magic on you right now, what do you think would happen?" "Your magic is far from perfect," Ash replied. "It still has many flaws. For example, the stronger will dominate the weaker, so the chances of you being controlled instead are high." "Are you sure I've used up all my magic power?" "That's an issue, too," Aura admitted with an innocent smile, still shaking the scales. She sighed playfully. "Although my control has improved, it's a risky gamble for a young demon like me." Your magic has too many weaknesses. You should switch to something more reliable. Ash, pale from blood loss, shook his head, offering advice. Thanks for your concern, but if we were to compare on a larger scale, it's impossible for us to lose if we're on the same level. So are you jealous? Think whatever you like, Ash muttered. Though the injury to his neck wasn't fatal, demons could survive such wounds unless decapitated, he still felt drained. He had no energy left to argue with Aura. Shakily, he stood up and began to walk toward the village, hoping to rest for a bit before deciding what to do next. Aura followed closely behind, skipping and chatting away, her endless chattering making Ash feel her usual annoyance had increased tenfold. After resting briefly in the village, Ash ignored the villagers' pleas for him to stay. He took some food, most of the village's cash, and the cavalry captain's sword, and left with the villagers waving reluctantly. Ash knew the deaths of the enemy cavalry would soon be discovered, and the village would likely attract unwanted attention. Staying there was no longer an option. Of course, taking most of the village's money might seem cruel, but the value of the remaining cavalry weapons and armor would provide the villagers with enough funds to rebuild their homes. However, half a year later, as Ash and Aura passed by the village again, this time with a new herd of animals, their curiosity led them to the outskirts. What they found was a scene far different from the prosperous recovery they had imagined. Chapter 9, Heading North to the Demon Clan's Headquarters. ___________. The morning sun did not penetrate the clouds to reach the earth. An atmosphere of horror always lingered over the village. Compared to its once prosperous past, the village now stood as a place filled with scattered tragedies. The air was heavy with the strong scent of blood, and the villagers lying lifeless on both sides of the road had died with their eyes wide open in shock. There were no signs of pain on their faces, suggesting they had been killed instantly. The only traces left were the corpses of civilians and long-dried blood on the ground. Judging by the methods used, it was the demons, Aura concluded after a brief observation of the scene. No one had been spared, whether children or adults. This was typical of the demon's style, ruthless, cruel, and thorough, where lives were mercilessly ravaged and trampled upon. Ash stood in silence, staring at the two familiar stone statues in the center of the village, indescribable emotions flickering deep within his dark pupils. The village had been protected by demons and wasn't destroyed by humans. Even though more than half of the villagers had been killed or injured, the village had been trying to recover. However, it was soon completely destroyed by passing demons. Was this the village's fate, or was there something more? How pitiful, Ash murmured as he crouched down, gently brushing the cold cheek of a young child with his fingertips. It would be great if the goddess you believe in really existed. Aura appeared confused. What are you doing? I just don't want to end up like this. I can only continue to work hard on my power. We need to think of some way. A way. The biggest difference between demons and humans in magic is the matter of inheritance. We don't have a teacher, so we have to figure everything out on our own, which is why we're still third-rate. Wouldn't it be better to find a teacher? Ash slowly stood up and turned toward the girl who always followed him. But Aura's response was to burst into laughter, almost falling backward. Just find a teacher. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ash, you're so funny. We're demons. How could anyone possibly teach us? Are you serious? Of course, the demons won't teach us. So, we'll have to change our target. He ignored Aura's laughter and walked ahead without looking back. But for now, let's leave this place. Yes, yes, Aura wiped away her tears of laughter, her tone devoid of interest, and followed him out of the village. Before leaving, Ash set fire to the houses, letting the village, once his home, be engulfed by flames. He then turned away and left. But before they had walked too far, Aura nudged his stomach with her elbow, looking annoyed. By the way, where are we going next? I heard there's a demon king in the north. Want to go hang out there? I've been thinking about that, too. So, what's the plan? I'm still thinking. And how's that going? You're getting on my nerves. Can you tone it down a bit? No, I'm fine, oh. Aura puffed out her chest in defiance, but before she could finish, Ash slapped her across the face, cutting off any further words. He pushed Aura aside, who was standing in his way, and walked ahead quickly, frowning as he worried about what to do next. If possible, he didn't want to keep wandering aimlessly. Maybe it would be better for him to join the Demon King. After leaving the village, Ash wondered if the surviving villagers had told anyone about the demons living there. But now that the demons had massacred the village, the area would become even more dangerous for them. This thought troubled him again and again. He glanced over at Aura, who sat not far away, sulking but already settled on the back of the magic bowl. Though she didn't want to engage with him, she couldn't help but ask, noticing his gaze, "What's wrong? Have you figured it out yet? Let's go back first. We'll talk while we walk." Ash then mounted the back of the wolf, keeping some distance from Aura, as he continued to ponder their next move. Upon returning to the simple wooden house where they had been living, he sat on the rough wooden sofa, looking at the indifferent girl sitting across from him. He sighed deeply. After thinking it over, we really need to leave here. If we stay any longer, we might get surrounded and attacked. You better protect me well. It'd be a pain if I were to get in danger. That's exactly what I wanted to say. But is this really the right time for this discussion? He sighed again, shaking his head. Our bond is strong enough, typical for siblings, I suppose. More importantly, where should we go after we leave? The north. That's where the demon clan's base is. So, it's the north after all. Well, I don't mind. Since Ash had already made his decision, Aura didn't bother overthinking it. She simply stood up and began packing her things. Demons weren't known for procrastination when it came to survival. In fact, they could be even more diligent than others. Aura's behavior in this regard was no exception. So, with their minds made up, the two began packing together, preparing to cross the continent that day and head north toward the demon gathering place. It wasn't because they particularly liked other demons or felt any loyalty toward the Demon King. Demons were only loyal to themselves. For now, they just wanted to avoid being killed. Though demons frequently killed each other, and the weak were mercilessly trampled, they were sometimes ignored. That was preferable to the certainty of being hunted down by humans. Of course, humans weren't much better. They also killed each other and ruthlessly abused the weak. The difference was that demons operated by the law of the jungle, while humans were more structured socially. Though, the perverted ones found even more creative ways to exploit the weak. Maybe both demons and humans thought the other was abnormal, but, at least neither Ash nor Aura had the energy to dwell on philosophical or sociological questions like that. Chapter 10, Parting Ways and Accidentally Joining the Army. Thanks to Ash's hornless nature, their journey north was unexpectedly smooth. The animals moved alone through the jungle. Ash sat up front, driving the carriage, while Aura hid inside, posing as a young lady. She was dressed like a Middle Eastern woman, her head wrapped tightly in cloth. "Ah, this is so boring. Ash, tell me a joke," Aura's complaint came from the carriage. Without missing a beat, Ash retorted, "Don't bother me. I'm reading a book." "A new book? What's so interesting about human history? You're so weird." "I'd rather not end up like you, uneducated and clueless," he replied, occasionally flicking the horse's reins while keeping his eyes fixed on a book he'd recently bought in town, A History of the World. While Aura occasionally chatted with him, Ash had also discovered something noteworthy in the yellowed, nearly weathered book that had been given to him as a freebie. 500 years ago, humans could all learn magic. The great magician Flam had an even stronger master, someone considered the magician closest to the goddess. The great magician Siri. As he carefully flipped through the damaged pages, it felt as though he had uncovered a long-forgotten, extraordinary figure. He sighed softly. It would be great if I could learn from someone like that. Flam's magic from 500 years ago was far beyond this era. Siri must have been even stronger, right? Do you really think they'd teach demons? Aura poked her head out from the carriage, resting her chin on his shoulder as she mercilessly doused his musings with cold reality. I was just daydreaming. It's been 500 years, no one knows if Siri is even alive. And, by the way, your horn is pressing into my temple. It hurts. Maybe don't get so close next time. For now, Ash could only feel regret over the legendary magician, whose existence was summed up in just one sentence. If only he had someone to teach him, if he were the strongest magician in the world, maybe he wouldn't have had to hide in the mountains all this time. Perhaps the village's tragedy could have been avoided. These were the thoughts that would occasionally weigh on his mind after reading the book. But it was just a sigh of regret. Traveling through time was nothing more than a pipe dream. For a while, the two traveled at a leisurely pace, thinking together about where they might find a quiet place to continue their magic research. Early one morning, as the sun barely rose above the horizon, the air was cold and slightly damp. On a seemingly endless, desolate road with no sign of human habitation, their solitary carriage moved slowly. As they neared the border, they saw a group of heavily armed soldiers guarding the crossing not far ahead. "Because it's wartime, we're not allowed to leave the country freely," Ash muttered, troubled. Aura's voice piped up from behind, "Why don't we just kill them? Don't be rash unless it's absolutely necessary. What if there are more troops nearby?" Fine, I'll do what you say," Aura grumbled but quickly dropped the idea. Ash climbed off the carriage, approaching the soldiers who surrounded them. He reached into his pocket, intending to bribe them to let them pass, but things didn't go as expected. Instead of taking the money and sending him on his way, as was usually the case, the soldiers wanted to conscript him, allowing the much younger Aura to leave. The situation could only be described in one word: conscription. During times of war, it was normal to drag people into labor or conscript them as soldiers. This made Ash understand why there was no one else on the road, because the local residents knew that soldiers were blocking the way and drafting men. What should I do? Should I get rid of them? Or should I follow them and look for a chance to escape? Should I leave peacefully? Ash worried for a while but eventually shook his head slightly at Aura, who was watching him from a distance. He was taken away, while Aura watched. At that moment, the two were forced to part ways. Although Aura was troubled for a while, she chose to take a detour, leaving the war-torn country and continuing north because it's Ash, after all. There's no way he'll die so easily. With this thought in mind, Aura left without worry. However, due to the lack of Ash, she had no choice but to avoid human settlements and take a longer detour through the forest. As for Ash, whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, he was taken directly to a recruit camp and spared from becoming labor to build fortifications. When registering his information, Ash mentioned that he knew magic and gave a live demonstration. This successfully earned him a position as a battlefield mage, where he received what seemed to be pretty good treatment. In the military camp, most of the country's magic was made available to him, and Ash found that there no longer seemed to be a need for him to head north. He stayed in the military camp, studying magic all day long. Only 1 month passed this way, and Ash was given a saber and a robe, following the troops as they marched towards the enemy country. That night, the atmosphere in the Mage Corps was extremely tense, as many of them, like Ash, had been conscripted against their will and dragged into a war they didn't want to be part of. As mages, Ash and his 3 new companions received some special treatment. Even during the march, they didn't have to walk like the rest but were allowed to stay together in a carriage. Of course, this was more to save their energy so they could play a greater role on the battlefield, but I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. The young female mage sitting opposite Ash was curled up in the corner, her hands wrapped around her knees, her face full of despair as she repeated the same words over and over. Upon closer inspection, her body was trembling constantly. Next to Ash, the middle-aged woman sat absent-mindedly stroking a letter with her thumb. Ash knew her well enough to know that the letter was from her daughter. There was nothing strange about this. Most people on the battlefield clung to thoughts of their family or loved ones to help them survive this hell. It seemed that even in this world, it was no different. Sitting diagonally across from Ash, an old man with a long beard held a wooden statue of a goddess, praying quietly. However, Ash knew that this man wasn't actually a devout believer of the goddess of creation. He had never been religious. He was only praying now because he had no other option. Whether cramming in faith at the last minute would have any effect, the answer would soon be found on the battlefield. Chapter 11, The Real War. ___________. Compared to his teammates, Ash seemed the calmest. Though the war and hatred here didn't belong to him, he was merely a passerby. But now, no matter how reluctant he was, he had been pulled into this war. In the past, he had experienced small skirmishes in forests and villages, places where the strong preyed on the weak. That experience left him better prepared than the others around him, who had also been caught up in this conflict. Perhaps it was because of his calmness that he had been made the captain of the four-person team in the carriage. Ha! Or maybe I should find a way to get out of this damn place. He muttered quietly, hiding the rest of his thoughts as he slightly lifted the curtain of the carriage. Outside, vast snow-covered plains stretched endlessly before his eyes. Distant forests dotted the horizon like emeralds against the white blanket of snow, contrasting with the softly glowing sky. During the boring march, time seemed to pass slowly, but the beautiful scenery outside the window still managed to capture Ash's attention. The air was crisp and filled with the fresh scent of ice and snow, though the rhythmic pounding of horses' hooves through the snow broke the tranquility of the scene. After some time, a small town emerged at the edge of the snowfield, its streets quiet and desolate. As the army approached, old houses and recruitment notices lined the streets, filling Ash's view and quickly making him lose interest. It's daytime now. We should reach the front line soon after dinner, he muttered to himself, closing his eyes. In the southern countries, snow was uncommon, but this place sat on a plateau, covered in ice and snow year-round. The two nations were fighting for control of this snowy region. Not far from the town, the scene shifted dramatically. In sharp contrast to the previous beauty, the armies lined up on both sides of the battlefield, prepared for conflict. However, the front line of the opposing army appeared disorganized, though the reason became obvious soon enough. A group of children, no older than 10 on average, stood at the front, boys and girls alike. Their eyes were lifeless, and they held long swords in their hands. Clearly, they were being used as cannon fodder and spiritual meat shields. Don't their parents object to this? Aren't they afraid of causing riots? Or are they all orphans? Ash muttered to himself. The middle-aged woman in his team, who had been sitting across from him earlier, had a complicated expression when she heard his words. They don't have parents. These are war orphans. Really? So, we're the lucky ones. Almost. We still have some strength left, but who knows what will happen. Captain, if I die, could you take care of my child? I don't want my child to. Hold on, we've only known each other for a month, and you're already saying this. But right now, Captain, you seem the calmest, so. Am I the only one who can ask for your help? Ash nodded silently but sighed. Even if I survive this war, I won't stay here, so I can't accept your request. You're really going too far. At least you could have agreed, if only to comfort me. I don't like lying. You'll have to find a way to survive on your own. After that, he paid no more attention to the middle-aged woman, whose face had fallen with sadness. Instead, he focused on preparing for the impending battle, holding his breath as he readied himself. Soon after, the sound of war drums echoed across the wilderness, and the army began to move in an orderly formation, launching volleys of arrows at the enemy's cannon fodder. The wizards followed behind, waving their wands and brewing powerful spells. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Ash blended into the group, symbolically fulfilling his role by hurling fireballs into the dense enemy lines. He had hoped to simply go through the motions, fishing in troubled waters, while looking for an opportunity to escape. But the situation was more serious than he had imagined. Just as the two armies clashed, a cavalry unit suddenly emerged from the flank, like a sharp sword cutting through the supporting troops. They charged forward, swords gleaming through the dust, heading straight for the magicians. Magicians of this era were generally slow in casting spells, and they particularly lacked ways to counter surprise attacks. This was why they had been issued sabers from the beginning. In an instant, screams rang out around Ash, and the nightmare of battle unfolded before him. The world turned red with blood as his former companions fell one by one. Yet in the midst of this chaos, Ash's mastery of gravity magic allowed him to stand out. However, by the time the battle that lasted several hours came to an end, most of his teammates had perished. The only one left alive beside him was the middle-aged woman, who had clung to life with all her strength. She still knelt on the ground, barely breathing. You're really amazing. Can belief really increase someone's chance of survival? Ash muttered, looking at the woman whose throat had been slashed by a knight's sword, blood pouring from the wound as she tried desperately to stop it. When he saw a priest running over to administer emergency treatment, Ash couldn't help but feel surprised she was still alive. As the priest tended to the woman, Ash walked around, surveying the battlefield. Corpses littered the ground, and Ash realized they were the only two left from their entire team. Yet this was considered fortunate. Out of more than 30 in their squadron, fewer than 10 remained. He stood there in a daze, staring blankly at his hands, which were once again stained with blood. Shifting his gaze from his blood-covered hands, he looked up. Wherever the wind and snow reached, bodies lay buried beneath the sudden heavy snowfall. The snow and blood created a chillingly beautiful yet brutal scene. Is this a real war? Ash murmured to himself, unsure whether he was thankful to be alive or overwhelmed by the horrific sight before him. But regardless, in the face of this war, such thoughts seemed utterly insignificant. Chapter 12, Raising Souls. In the conflict between the kingdom of Tad and its neighboring country on the snowfield, the mage troop suffered heavy losses. However, Ash's exceptional performance led to his promotion from a small captain to a large captain. Then came the second, third, fourth, and fifth times. The endless series of small and large conflicts continued intermittently for 5 years. The continuous battles did not kill him. Instead, as a demon, he was tempered by the war, and unexpectedly, he rose to become a general of the Tad kingdom. Though the war was intermittent, Ash had already gathered 1,000 souls by the second year. He made his first wish, desiring to become the strongest, but it was not granted. He wished for the magical power and combat ability of a demon king, but it wasn't enough. He also desired all the magical knowledge in the world, but again, the souls he had collected were insufficient to perform a miracle of that scale. Frustrated, he realized that the system operated on a principle of equal exchange. Perhaps the price wasn't exactly equal, at least not to him. With only 1,000 souls, his options were limited. So, he continued to gather more souls and eventually made a wish to gain complete knowledge of gravity magic. For the next 4 years, Ash studied the gravity magic system granted by the miracle, refining his skills throughout the long war. After 3 years of sweeping battlefields, he amassed thousands of souls, giving him another chance to perform a miracle. This made him decide not to stay any longer in a kingdom that offered him little in terms of further knowledge. The endless war had lost its meaning to him. Life is so unpredictable. Standing on the snowfield where he had once lost a battle while supporting other fronts, Ash sighed as he looked at the frozen bloodstains beneath his feet in the familiar, yet distant, snowstorm. Kathy, the woman who had survived the battle with him and now served as his adjutant and captain of the magic guard, turned her head curiously. She bore a hideous scar on her neck. "What are you talking about, Master Ash?" This time, their main force took a heavy hit. The borrowed troops from neighboring countries are mostly gone. They should behave themselves for a while. I think so too, but, are you ready to keep attacking? No, I'm almost ready to leave. Kathy, it's about time for you to go home too. Eh? Master Ash, what are you saying? I'm leaving this place. But before that, I can help you secure a good amount of money. With it, you should be able to buy the big house you've always dreamed of in the capital, where your daughter and mother can live a comfortable life, right? Wait, Master Ash. I don't quite understand. Kathy was stunned by his sudden words, doubting what she had just heard. Ash spoke more to himself than to her. I plan to leave here. This war doesn't belong to you or me. But if you choose to stay, I won't stop you. Won't they ask you to reconsider? I've already submitted my resignation, and I would leave regardless of their response. Now, what about you? He turned to look at the woman who had followed him for 5 years, unsure of what choice she would make. Kathy was not a beneficiary of the war, but a victim of it. Both her father and husband had been forcibly conscripted, and no one knew where they had died. When Kathy faced Ash's question, she remained silent for a long time, then smiled bitterly and shrugged. You're planning to leave? How can I stay here? Yeah. Are you planning to go north? How do you know? Because, you're a demon, right? What? You figured it out. I had a slight feeling but couldn't be certain. You still look like the same young man from the beginning. Some people in the kingdom are also suspicious of your true identity. I've heard a bit about that, which is why I have to leave now. Besides. Ash, who didn't care much about it, smiled and looked at Kathy with a strange expression. So, are you going to report me? How could I possibly do that? Kathy smiled bitterly and touched the wound on her neck. If you hadn't knocked the cavalryman away, I wouldn't even have my head attached right now. And now I realize that demons aren't like the rumors say. No, don't think like that. I'm the only exception. If you see a demon, either run or kill them. That's my last piece of advice to you. So, everyone except you is dangerous? Kathy asked, still a bit unsure. Of course. They're ruthless and cruel. Even demons need to be careful around each other. My situation is just special. Is that so? Yes. The conversation fell into an awkward silence. Neither of them was particularly skilled at keeping a conversation going. After a long while, Kathy couldn't help but ask, "You gave me all the money, what about you?" "It's fine. I've kept enough for my journey." "So, will we meet again?" "Honestly, that sounds like something a heroine in a story would say," Ash replied with a teasing smile, breaking the somber atmosphere. "But I like younger girls, you know. Wives and aunts are a little. If it's okay, can you ask your daughter to say that instead?" Kathy couldn't help but laugh, shaking her head. "You've misunderstood. I just meant that, if there's ever a chance, I'd like to introduce my daughter and my mother to you. They've always wanted to thank you personally for looking after me." "Let's not. The lifespan of humans and demons is quite different. There's no benefit in getting to know one more human. But if demons are as dangerous as you say, wouldn't you be lonely?" "I'm used to it. Aren't all demons like this?" "But you're not an ordinary demon, right?" "That's true, but I'll get used to it." He smiled, but there was a trace of melancholy in his expression. He didn't say anything more, and Kathy, sensing his mood, lowered her eyes with a sense of regret. The silence between them lingered for a moment longer. Neither knew what else to say, and the weight of parting hung heavily in the air. Chapter 13, The Miracle of the Goddess, the World 500 Years Ago. _______. That night, the two drank heavily together, and the next day, with Ash's help, Kathy was officially discharged from the army. On the same day, Ash parted ways with her on the snowy plain. As Kathy stood there, watching the familiar figure gradually fade into the distance, she couldn't help but sigh, murmuring to herself, "Master Ash, you're so pitiful." "Pitiful? Me? Why?" "Because I'm an outsider." The familiar voice echoed in her mind, leaving her slightly puzzled. But he didn't dwell on it. Ash quietly walked away, and once he was out of Kathy's sight, he commanded the system to recreate the goddess miracle, transporting him back to the world 500 years ago. On the vast, snow-covered plains, a figure suddenly appeared, slowly falling from midair into the snow. "What the hell? I'm still in this place. But I've heard that Ciri, the magician closest to the goddess, is somewhere in the south. Although that's a bit suspicious. Well, it looks like I'll have to spend some time finding her." Ash, looking a bit troubled, pulled out a map full of markings. Although there were too many uncertainties, for now, he could only search one place at a time. Fortunately, as a demon, he had all the time he needed. The world 500 years ago wasn't very different from the present. At least, from Ash's perspective, technological progress during this time was minimal. Magic, in particular, was extremely underdeveloped, and it was clear that humans had not yet widely learned its secrets. So, as he continued searching for Ciri, he practiced magic, and after 6 months, deep within the abandoned ruins, constructed from towering stones that had weathered the ages yet still stood strong, a faint beam of light cut through the dust of time, illuminating a distant corner. There, stacked high in endless layers, were mountains of books, taller than a person, and at the far end of this ocean of knowledge, he finally found his long-sought goal. On a massive stone throne, resembling that of a king, sat an elf woman with long golden hair and a surprisingly petite figure. She lounged in the chair in a rather indecent posture, one hand resting on her chin as she gazed at Ash, who was slowly descending the stairs, with great interest. "You must be Ciri, the magician closest to the goddess on this continent," Ash said. Ciri grinned, her eyes full of amusement as she looked him over. "You're certainly interesting. This is the first time I've seen a demon like you. Even." Her playful smile grew wider. "You know who I am, yet you dare stand before me. Are you here to challenge me?" "No," Ash replied calmly. "I'm here to become your disciple." "Ha! How ridiculous. You want to become my disciple?" Ciri laughed, leaning forward. Even though I'm an elf, I'm still considered human in the broad sense. I'm completely irreconcilable with demons. How dare you ask me to be your mentor? Is your head screwed on right? Wait, you don't even have horns. There must be something wrong with you. We are entirely different races, hostile to one another. What you said makes sense, but I still think I'm normal. Besides, at least I know very well that you don't really want world peace, right? Oh. His confident words made Ciri narrow her eyes. If you wanted it, you could have made it happen a long time ago. You speak as if you know me well. I've done some research. I can see you've killed plenty of people. So why should I teach you magic? I've thought about that, actually. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you? We have to try first, don't we? Very good, I like it. After a long silence, Ciri suddenly laughed and clapped her legs in delight. Let's see what kind of demon I can create by teaching you. Even though I expected something like this, isn't it still a bit strange? Ash asked, bewildered by her reasoning. It's interesting, isn't that enough? Just tell me what magic you want. Anything at all. Anything. Yes. That immortal magic. How could such magic exist? Ash blurted out. Ciri rolled her eyes and retorted, if it did, would humans still die? That's true. Ash closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the biggest issue he faced on the battlefield. His body wasn't strong enough as a magician. Is there any magic that can make my body as strong as a warrior's? In the age of mythology, there really was magic like that. Really? Yes, it allows magicians to freely convert magic power to achieve the strength of warriors at the same level. It's a very useful type of magic and can deliver unexpected results in critical moments. But I can't do it. After a pause, she spread her hands dramatically, making Ash nearly want to hit her. Wait, don't you know everything? I've mastered almost all human magic, but not all of it. Moreover, this magic wasn't created by humans, it was invented by a great demon. I've studied it for thousands of years but still haven't succeeded. However, I can give you all of my research through transfer magic. Transfer magic was a process that allowed someone to directly pass on knowledge to another person at the cost of losing it themselves. Even if the magic was incomplete, Ciri could still transfer it. Ash wanted to complain, but since it was the magic of the Great Demon Clan, he couldn't say much. After all, the unique magic mastered by any major demon clan wasn't something humans could easily learn. The magic of demons was fundamentally different from the magic of other races. Humans, including elves, could only attempt to imitate the spellcasting effects of demons. But the spellcasting processes were completely different. Many aspects of demon magic were altered to the point where they couldn't be reproduced by humans. To put it simply, even if humans could figure out the principles behind demon magic, they lacked the magical organs that demons, and especially great demons, had. Humans would never be able to fully replicate their unique powers. Chapter 14, A Master and Disciple Who Faced the Same Difficulty. At first, Ash thought that becoming an apprentice might involve some strange tests, but it turned out to be unexpectedly simple. It was surprisingly easy to complete the apprenticeship, and just as easy to gain access to the magic of the great demon tribe from the mythological era. Ash also stayed on to read more of Ciri's books. The reason wasn't anything special. Ciri had the power to end the war, but she was unwilling to do so. In fact, she generally wouldn't act against the demons unless absolutely necessary. According to Ash's research before coming here, the elves' sense of racial identity was quite weak. They seemed to prefer maintaining a state of war over achieving world peace. Unless a great disaster occurred, they might choose to stop it, or they might not, depending on the circumstances. It was with this knowledge that Ash dared to venture here. And only because Ciri found him interesting did she accept him as her disciple. Ash, since you're now my disciple and I've taken on a new apprentice, you should hurry and prepare a feast to celebrate. Ciri, who had always sought to escape the kitchen, waved her hand and summoned her new apprentice without hesitation, but Ash, still engrossed in her book collection, looked up and stared at her without moving. This immediately displeased her, and she asked, "Didn't you hear what I said?" "No, I heard. I was just wondering, are you serious, Ciri?" What do you mean? I teach you magic, but you won't even cook for me. It's not that I don't want to. It's just that I don't know how. Of course, if you want to try demon cuisine, I wouldn't mind showing off my skills. Demon cuisine. We eat it raw. But can your stomach handle it? If you can, I don't mind making some for you. Ash said this earnestly, though he didn't really know much about it himself. Then, he stood up silently, intending to prepare some pork sashimi for her. Ciri's face wrinkled at the thought of raw meat. Forget it. Forget it. I'll do it myself. By the way, I'm a little different. I prefer cooked meat. Who asked you? Get lost. Go eat your demon specialties on your own. No need, I can also have barbecue. Are you too lazy to do it, or are you lying to me? Trust me, I'm thinking about your health. Although Ciri really wanted to make Ash do some work, unfortunately, whenever she tried to get him to cook, the food was terrible. She even tried to teach him, but 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Ciri, add some chili. Trust me, this meat tastes better with a bit of spice. No, I don't eat spicy food. Ciri flipped the spoon and scolded without turning her head. Also, why are you giving orders when I'm the one teaching you? Stop talking like that. Why should we worry about the master-disciple dynamic so much? Ash casually ignored Ciri's displeasure and muttered, use less salt. Your cooking's too salty. A mere demon, yet you're quite picky. I'm worried you're getting old. Eating too much spicy food can cause high blood pressure. I've lived for thousands of years, eating like this the whole time, and I've been just fine. But you've only been here for 3 years, and my blood pressure has already risen a lot. How did teaching him magic turn into improving my own cooking skills? And then, somehow, I ended up responsible for the catering. Although she was often bored and many of Ash's ideas were admittedly good, the inexplicable sense of emptiness still made Ciri quite unhappy. She turned around and glared fiercely at Ash. Being well versed in the habits of his petite elf teacher by now, Ash raised his hands instinctively, backed away with a smile, and silently left, doing his best to avoid getting smacked by his angry mentor. The days of eating and drinking for free have their limits, after all. Even though elves have immense patience and their perception of time is different from that of humans, by the 3rd year, Ciri could no longer tolerate it and decided to force him to cook. She even vowed to teach him to be a good cook so she wouldn't have to handle the cooking anymore. Yes. Flip it like this and add more seasoning. Hey. Don't think I didn't see that. No chili. If you sneak chili in when I'm not paying attention, I'll stuff it all into your mouth. You're so strict. But isn't it unreasonable to roast a whole lamb without any spice? I'm the master, so if I say no, it's no. Don't talk back. Watching her disciple squat in front of the grill, flipping the meat, Ciri raised her leg and lightly kicked him on the butt, slapping away the chili powder he had just picked up. Tisk, old people these days are so unreasonable. Ash muttered under his breath, smacking his lips as he broke off a piece of lamb to taste without the chili. However, when he tore off the meat, his hands were burned by the heat. Unable to hold it, he kept switching hands to avoid getting scorched. He instinctively turned around and threw it toward her. Quick! Quick! Ciri! It's hot, hot, hot! Take it! Ah! Ugh, it's so hot! Hot! Ciri, caught off guard, reflexively caught the meat, but her expression quickly twisted in pain from the heat. She frantically switched it between her hands and, in a panic, tossed it back at him. By reflex, Ash caught it again, but hastily threw it back. No. Don't give it to me. It's burning. It's so hot. Hot. You brat, do you think I'm not afraid of the heat? After another round of back and forth, Ciri finally came to her senses. She switched hands one last time and quickly threw the entire roasted leg of lamb to the ground. Having successfully dealt with the hot meat, Ash wiped the sweat from his forehead. Phew, that was close. My hands almost got blisters. Yes, you're fine, but... Ciri's face was full of exasperation as she held her 2 reddened hands in the air. With a look that could kill, she gritted her teeth and hissed, my hands are already blistered. Chapter 15, Ciri refuses to be a parasite. Underscore 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 underscore. Ciri's curse-like whisper made Ash glance at his red hands. He averted his gaze, trying to pretend nothing had happened as he awkwardly changed the subject. Ah, come to think of it, will the roasted lamb still taste good after being frozen? I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But I do know that if you don't give me an explanation today, you'll definitely regret it. After all, she had lived for thousands of years. Ciri smiled with no intention of letting the matter drop, forcing Ash to raise his hands in surrender. Well, actually, I think it was just too hot. Do you think I'm not afraid of being burned? They say older people don't mind pain as much because their hands are thick with calluses. Ah, what a coincidence. I've also heard that demons are thick-skinned and don't mind a beating. Ciri's smile grew even brighter. How about changing today's class to a magic attack and defense session? I'll attack, and you run away. I refuse. Give me your reasons. Because you'll definitely take revenge. He pointed at Ciri as he backed away, hoping to stop her retaliation with persuasion. And think about it, Ciri. Your well-behaved disciple worked hard to cook for you. Shouldn't you feel touched? Well-behaved. Ha. That's funny. I don't know how you can say that with a straight face, but I am touched. And as a reward for guessing correctly. Ciri's hands were suddenly surrounded by dark flames as she grinned ferociously. The fire of hell. Boom. In an instant, the makeshift barbecue stand outside the ruins was engulfed in flames. Ash took advantage of the chaos to escape, but Ciri, still harboring resentment, continued her bombardment. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding forests were completely destroyed. Half a month passed in no time. After finishing the meal that Ciri had reluctantly prepared, Ash decided it was time to explore and learn more about the powerful elves of this era. He set his sights on visiting the elven village in a neighboring country that Ciri had told him about. Ciri, I'm going on a long trip, so you won't need to make my meals for a while. Am I your mother? I've been wanting to get rid of you, a freeloader who eats and drinks without lifting a finger. In fact, it would be better if... Ciri, sitting on her throne, initially looked displeased but then broke into a wide grin. If you leave now, don't come back. Don't say that. Once a teacher, always a mother. In my heart, you are, whoa. Before he could finish, a powerful gust of wind interrupted him, blowing him out of the hall. Using magic to lighten his body, Ash rolled across the ground. Though covered in dirt, he wasn't hurt. He stood up calmly, dusted himself off, and muttered, I'm studying hard, and you kick me out like this. Isn't that a bit harsh? However, deep inside the hall, Ciri completely ignored him, leaving him feeling a bit disappointed. With a large bag of ancient magic books borrowed from Ciri, Ash left the place, at least temporarily. While searching for the elf village, Ash hadn't yet found any elves, but instead came across someone strangely familiar. But, thinking carefully, he realized there couldn't be many people he knew from 500 years ago. Not that things had changed much 500 years later. The woman's long orange hair covered half of her face, making her appear to be in her early 30s. Ash found this suspicious at first, but he quickly remembered that he had read plenty about this person in his studies. She was none other than the great mage of human magic, Flam. And now. You. Flam's gaze narrowed as she noticed something strange. Why are you staring at me? Ahem. You're Flam, right? I've heard of you. You've heard of me. Flam, who usually kept a low profile, frowned at his words. Her expression became more guarded, and she secretly prepared magic. After all, in this chaotic world, danger was everywhere. Even the most powerful magician could fall prey to a hidden dagger. Don't get me wrong, Ash said quickly. I heard about you from Ciri. Master. To be precise, I'm your junior fellow apprentice. Junior brother. Master has accepted a new disciple. Is that strange? Very. Flam didn't hesitate to nod, casting a scrutinizing gaze at Ash. Given Master's personality, it shouldn't be that easy for her to take on a disciple. What exactly did she see in you? Maybe my sincerity and diligence. It may not be polite for me to say this, but Master isn't the type to accept a disciple just because they're sincere and diligent in learning. She's also rather rude, you know. She knocked me out when I left. I just hope she learns to respect her elders and care for the younger ones. Flam said nothing, simply continuing to stare at him in silence. While Ash's appearance seemed ordinary, his aura gave her an unsettling feeling. What she found most disturbing was that his presence distinctly gave off the sensation that he had killed many people. Could it be that she was just overthinking things? Or perhaps it was because it was her first time seeing someone who had taken so many lives that it caused such unease. She wasn't certain. Out of an abundance of caution, Flam chose not to say anything more. She quietly distanced herself from Ash, planning to confirm everything with Ciri once she returned. Ash watched her go, and only after Flam disappeared from his view did the smile vanish from his face. He let out a sigh of relief, muttering to himself, "The stealth technique Ciri taught me really works. If I had run into her earlier, I definitely would have been exposed." Although they hadn't fought, Ash could tell from her aura that Flam was undoubtedly the strongest human he had ever encountered, even if she had been suppressing her full strength. But since she had already chosen to avoid him, he saw no point in worrying. With a light heart, he continued on his way, following the map that Ciri had given him before. As he walked, he suddenly realized something. Ciri had given him this map and told him the location of the elf village, maybe to get him out of the way. Could it be that she was trying to stop him from freeloading any longer? Chapter 16, The Gap Between Reality and Ideal, First Encounter with Frieren. ___________. After a long journey, Ash finally located the legendary elf village using the map, but isn't this a little too far from what I imagined? Deep within the remote, primeval forest lay the hidden elf village, seemingly forgotten by time. It rested quietly in an empty, secluded area, surrounded by ancient, towering trees. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting mottled shadows across the village, shrouding the land in a mysterious, slightly melancholic veil. The elf stone houses were scattered across the open space. Though not exactly elegant, their rustic charm was, well, non-existent. There wasn't even a hint of aesthetic appeal, just simple, weathered buildings. The roofs were covered in moss and vines, showing the wear and tear of time, as if telling the story of wild, unchecked growth over the years. The doors and windows were small, a bit dilapidated, and no one seemed to have bothered to repair them. The scattered elves were simply dressed, almost resembling refugees. If not for the fact that their clothes were relatively neat, they could have easily been mistaken for ordinary medieval villagers. They moved about unenthusiastically, tending to their tasks without any real energy. No children or elders were in sight, at least, none that Ash could distinguish. The peculiar lowly elf Ciri had already shattered Ash's idealized image of elves with her quirky personality, but this village took it to a whole new level. Elves in stories were always portrayed as beautiful, elegant beings, often possessing a mystical aura. But in reality, why is there such a massive gap between stories and reality? This village is shabby and lacks any sense of beauty. These guys are crushing all my dreams. While grumbling about his shattered fantasy, Ash scanned the area and noticed one elf in the crowd who stood out, seemingly the strongest among them. The elf had a graceful figure, with smooth silver hair flowing down to her waist like a waterfall. It shimmered with a soft, mysterious glow, reminiscent of moonlight. Her delicate, elongated ears exuded an air of spirituality and elegance, and her emerald eyes were deep and luminous, captivating anyone who looked into them. Although she stood only about 1.5 meters tall, she had an undeniable petite charm. Every movement radiated grace and cuteness, evoking an almost instinctual desire to protect her. Well, actually, that was just Ash's imagination, the result of beautifying the elves he had read about in stories. In reality, although the elf did have silver hair down to her waist, long ears, and emerald eyes, she was quite small and had a rather chestnut-shaped body. The only advantage is probably that she looks quite cute, but she is a lowly, and he is not a Lolita complex, so it is indeed different from what he expected. While he was secretly depressed, the elf seemed to have noticed his gaze, walked over, and frowned. "Who are you? Why are you looking at me and sighing?" "Just a passerby." While speaking, he couldn't help but sigh again. "I just thought of something sad, please don't mind it. After all, I'm a good person." "Yeah. Are you really a good guy? Your aura is a little strange, and murderous, obviously." The girl pointed a finger at his face and asked bluntly, "Are you actually a fugitive? Do I look like that kind of person? I don't know, maybe. Actually, I am the general of the kingdom. Then why come here? Actually, I defected. Defected? The elf girl widened her eyes in surprise. He is indeed a fugitive. But why? Because I want to learn magic. Want to learn magic? You look pretty strong among humans, right? Although I haven't seen many humans. You look very strong. Can you teach me magic? Although the opponent was obviously not as strong as the two he had met before, she was still a long-lived elf and should have her own unique magic. Ash took out 2 gold coins from his body while speaking. This a payment, is it enough? The girl glanced at the money in his hand and shook her head slowly. No payment is needed here. That's troublesome. But in exchange, you can exchange it with your prey. Ah, I'm good at hunting. He smiled and then extended his hand to the girl in front of him. My name is Ash, what's yours? Frieren. Then please give me your guidance from now on, Miss Frieren. Frieren nodded coldly and walked toward a stone house without intending to say anything more to him. Although he felt a little regretful, he didn't care too much. He was just a little worried about what to do next. But Frieren stopped and looked back. What are you doing standing there? Ah. I was wondering what I should do at this time. Come over. Edna's house has been empty for a while. She probably won't come back before you die, so I can lend it to you temporarily. Frieren raised her hand and pointed to a building covered with vines. You're exaggerating, but how long is a while? About 30 years. It's a long while. It was like she had been out for 10 days or half a month, which made Ash smack his lips. However, he still looked around and couldn't help but ask, speaking of which, you should be very free. Why don't you repair these residences? They'll just break after a while. It's too much trouble. As long as they don't leak in the rain, it will be fine. How long is a while? Ah. Never mind. I can probably guess. He held his forehead with one hand and tried to adjust his thoughts. Even though he was already an immortal, he couldn't adapt to the elves' unique view of time for a while. But no matter what, he temporarily lived in this elf village, which he didn't know whether it could be considered hospitable or not. Chapter 17 Who is the Strange One? Since elves in this world are considered humans in a broad sense, and sometimes they call themselves humans, they do not have any xenophobic ideas towards humans. The long lifespan and the study of magic made this village different from the human village he first encountered. It seemed unexpectedly wealthy, or maybe not, perhaps they just simply had enough to eat. But being in this deep mountain, it's impossible to have any delicious food. But I didn't expect that the elves' barbecue skills to be so good. After all, I'm free. Frieren, who looked unmotivated, gave an answer without thinking. The answer made sense, but it made him want to complain. The look of wanting to say something but not being able to made Frieren raise her eyebrows subconsciously. What? It's okay. I just thought it would be great if I could adapt to this place as soon as possible. There's no point in adapting. You'll leave soon. Is that so? Everyone who comes here is like this. I heard that no one lives longer than 100 years. That means he's dead. Ah, it seems so. Frieren sighed in a tone that was a little lacking in emotion, staring at the flames in front of her. Human lifespans are really short. You die of old age before you get familiar with the world. I'm not saying, how slow are you? What does that mean? I'm slow to warm up. Never mind. Ash felt that human slowness was a little different from hers, so he simply ended this meaningless topic and asked, Can I ask you something? When are you going to teach me magic? Take a short break. Let me confirm first, how long is your short break? 30 years. Frieren didn't think much about it and gave a time that seemed about right. With 30 years, you will be able to adapt to this village and start studying properly, right? Are you serious? He asked, dumbfoundedly, while Frieren looked puzzled. Why would I lie? What should I do? I suddenly want to hit someone. Huh? Do you have a tendency to violence? Frieren subconsciously moved away from him and even regretted arranging a place for him to stay. This obviously defensive look made him put one hand on his forehead and try to suppress the boiling emotions in his heart, working hard not to hit her on the forehead. That's not it. The weird thing is you. Normally speaking. I can learn sea language from the very beginning to the very end in 30 years. What language is that? It sounds weird. He couldn't explain how the sea language worked. In short, he was speechless for a moment. He just covered his face and began to worry about the next communication and life living in this village. Although he was also an immortal, for a while, he was still unable to get used to the concept of time, which was so different from his past. But since he was already here, he was not willing to just leave like that, so he forced himself to make an agreement during the meal to start learning magic tomorrow. The next day, the agreed time arrived. He was going to ask Frieren to teach him magic, but when no one showed up, he went straight to Frieren's hut, and when he opened the door, he saw. What is this? The lower half of the silver-haired elf's body remained on the bed, but the upper half had fallen out of the bed, with the side of her face pressed against the ground. She was really using her face to support half of her body, and just looking at it made him feel a little pain in his face. After being dumbfounded for a moment, he squatted beside Frieren and poked her face with his hand. Hurry up and wake up, Frieren, the sun has already risen. Hello. Are you dead? Frieren didn't respond at all, which gave him a headache, and he flicked her long ears with his fingers. However, still no response. You don't want to wake up even after this? Then there's nothing I can do. After thinking for a moment, Ash raised his hand, grabbed her ankle, and lifted her up. This elf, whose age is unknown and whose body shape is similar to that of a lowly, was lifted upside down. Under the influence of gravity, the pure white skirt flipped over, revealing the girl's simple white panties. I used to wonder why there's underwear in this era. Now I'm wondering why this elf hasn't reacted to her underwear being exposed. Are all elves like this? Looking at the plain fabric without any embellishment, and not sensing any fragrance, only made his headache worse. The elf didn't make any noise, no matter how much he shook her, which made him question if there was something wrong with the elf population. However, just as the words left his mouth, a voice came from the side, "No, it's just that Frieren likes to sleep in." Is she really this naive? It's the first time I've seen someone sleep this deeply. He turned his head and saw an elf girl, dressed simply but wearing a dark cloak, who looked more mature than Frieren, standing at the door. Is this your first time meeting someone, newcomer? The girl observed him curiously. I guess so. My name's Ash, what's yours? Millie Ald. Really? That name's a bit too long. Can I just call you Millie? It's not that long, but your name's a bit short. By the way, do you know magic? Huh? Isn't this conversation moving a bit too fast? I think it's fine. But before we talk about that. Millie tilted her head, looking at Frieren, who was still hanging upside down in her hand, and asked, shouldn't we put Frieren down first? Her face is turning red. It's all red. Normally, that should mean she's awake, right? Yes, I'm awake, but I don't want to get up. Why not? Your underwear's showing. As he spoke, he continued to shake the girl upside down in his hands, as if shaking a rabbit he had casually picked up. Millie pointed out the problem expressionlessly. She's never left here, so she's a bit slow with things like that. Besides, to us, you're no different from a 3-year-old child. What a hassle. What a strange person. Indeed, she might be a bit strange for a human. Millie glanced at Frieren hanging in his hand but quickly looked back at his face. But for a human, your behavior is also a bit odd, isn't it? By the way, do you know magic? You're back to that again. Because it's important. You're really something. Can you please stay on topic? Well, either way, let's put her down first, shall we? Chapter 18 Emperor's Wine. Frieren is regretful. After giving up on waking Frieren, Ash followed Millie out of her room, no, her wine cellar, or rather, her residence. Just looking at the rows upon rows of wine barrels packed into the stone house made his scalp tingle. Why is there so much alcohol here? Millie didn't answer his question but instead pulled out a bottle of wine, proudly introducing it. Did you know? This is Emperor's wine. No idea. The Emperor's wine is a wine dedicated to the Emperor of the vast empire that ruled most of the continent. Millie continued, smiling slyly as she handed him the bottle. This is the finest nectar. Don't you want to taste it? Taste it? Then I'll let you go first. He opened the bottle cap with some doubt, but suddenly, he grabbed the elf by the chin and poured the wine into her mouth as if refueling a machine. The next moment. Puffed. The elf girl choked, spitting out a mouthful of wine. Instantly, the room was filled with the overwhelming stench of cheap alcohol. Just from the smell alone, one could question the quality of the wine. Millie, now with wine all over her face, glared at him angrily. You made me drink something so awful again. Have you already tasted Emperor's wine before? My sister usually has a similar look on her face when she's up to no good. Though he couldn't quite understand why other demons had such emotionless faces while Aura was so expressive. Was it really thanks to him? He still hadn't figured that out, and Millie, looking annoyed, muttered, "Someone beat me to it." So. It really does taste awful, doesn't it? Forget the taste, this is precious. It's really Emperor's wine. Millie emphasized, clearly upset. This made him hesitate for a moment, still looking warily at the wine in his hand. When you put it that way, I'm a little curious. Hurry and try it. Is anyone going to die? You just made me drink some. Do I look dead? That's true. Nodding slightly, he threw caution to the wind and drank it in one go. There was no soft flavor, no smoothness. The harsh, sour, and pungent taste exploded in his mouth and throat. The wine's acidity was way too high, and its sharpness made him recoil. Just drinking it filled him with distaste, and he couldn't help but frown. It's horrible. Yeah, I thought so too. Before I came to this village, I even carved a stone tablet praising the taste of Emperor's wine. Your character is worse than this wine. Thanks for the compliment, but you don't seem much better off. Millie nodded nonchalantly, giving an amused smile. I think we'll get along well. I just want to learn magic. It's fine, we have plenty of time. Don't use elves' time on me. All right, then we'll officially start in a few years. No more waiting. Today. Now. Right this second. He couldn't take the elves' relaxed sense of time anymore. Frustrated, he grabbed Millie and shook her until she finally gave in. But even though she agreed, Millie was still moving so slowly that it made Ash anxious. After constant urging, Millie reluctantly began to make preparations, that is, after eating breakfast, she mentally prepared herself to teach. However, the magic she eventually decided to teach him was to help wheat grow better. This kind of magic was completely useless to him, no matter how he looked at it. Frustrated, Ash chased after Millie, who had somehow escaped happily. He was determined to tie her up and make her teach him something more meaningful. But before he could catch Millie, around noon, he spotted Frieren emerging from her room, stretching lazily in the sunlight. That lazy look is like an old lady. He muttered without thinking, causing Frieren to sharply turn her head toward him. Her expression was clearly one of displeasure, as if his comment had struck a nerve. But he chose to ignore her and simply said, "What's the matter? Shouldn't young people be going to bed early and waking up early? These weren't modern-day kids staying up all night playing with their phones or computers. Why would medieval villagers, with nothing better to do, be so lazy?" Ash was genuinely puzzled. Frieren, with a stern face, retorted grumpily, "We have all the time in the world. What's the rush? All right." He initially wanted to give her a piece of his mind, but remembering that he still needed her help, he decided to hold his tongue. This left Frieren, who had been ready for a confrontation and prepared to scold him for lifting her up earlier, feeling like her efforts had been wasted. She didn't get the chance to say anything further. And so, Ash's learning in the elf village continued uneventfully in this peculiar atmosphere. Life in the elf village could be described as the very definition of monotony. It was dull and uneventful. Every elf seemed to exude a sense of laziness and lack of drive, which made Ash feel even less motivated than when he was with Millie. At least Ciri, despite being idle, still had the urge to do something, although, thanks to her magic, her clothes never actually got moldy. In contrast, it's already evening. Aren't you going to rest yet? Ash stood in Frieren's room, having entered without hesitation. He looked at her, already lying under her quilt with a blank expression on her face, clearly regretting agreeing to teach him magic in the first place. Chapter 19, The Secret of the Elves' Longevity, The Devil Outside the Village. ___________. Compared to Frieren and the other elves in the village, Ash's boundless enthusiasm made Frieren begin to wonder if most humans died before reaching the age of 100 due to sheer overwork. Yet now, despite recognizing the problem, Ash gave her no chance to regret teaching him. She wasn't the only one grumbling, though. Ash also wore a dark expression. It's just barely getting dark, and you're telling me you want to rest. Let's go find Millie. She's probably still drinking tonight. She should have time, Frieren suggested. No, absolutely not, he immediately shot down the idea, causing Frieren to throw off the quilt and glare at him in annoyance. Why? Hasn't she traveled abroad before? She must know a lot of magic, right? Yes, but for some reason, she's particularly obsessed with growing wheat. She even has magic that makes it sprout faster after planting. She insisted I learn that spell before teaching me anything else. She wouldn't budge, even after I drank her treasured wine. That's because wheat can be used to make wine. She probably fixates on it for that reason. By the way, you're ruthless. Frieren couldn't help but admire him, even if she was dumbfounded. I remember hearing it was wine from 600 years ago. She cherished it deeply, didn't she? And you just drank it without a second thought. Even so, it tasted awful. It's a miracle she didn't fight you over it. Why are you still complaining about the taste? Just be quiet. For now, I'll teach you the secret of our elven longevity. As she spoke, Frieren lay back down and pulled the quilt over herself again, turning her back on him. Just relax a bit. If you keep this up, you won't live for hundreds of years. Normal humans can't live that long, Ash muttered as he tugged at her blanket, trying to uncover it. But Frieren clung to the quilt stubbornly, refusing to let go. That's not necessarily true. Humans are always in such a hurry, and that's why they rarely live past 100. What nonsense. You're just wasting your life like this. How will you know your limits if you never try? Frieren retorted, as if she sincerely hoped he'd experiment with his life for 100 years. The thought made Ash break into a nervous sweat. Don't you think it's a bit tragic to gamble with your life? But isn't it more pitiful to live in ignorance? I don't think so. It's just 100 years. What's the big deal? We're getting off topic. Stop wasting your life already. You should let go of this argument, too, right? That night, Ash and Frieren argued and wrestled over the blanket, and the final result was. The next day, Frieren still hadn't woken up by noon, and at some point, she had rolled onto the floor, tangled up in the quilt. Meanwhile, Ash had taken over her bed, resting his head on her pillow, sleeping soundly, though without any covers. Millie, curious about why the village was so quiet that day, came over to investigate. But when she opened the door and saw the scene before her, Ash sleeping soundly in Frieren's bed while Frieren lay tangled in the blanket on the floor, her expression turned odd. However, sticking to her philosophy of avoiding unnecessary trouble, Millie, not wanting to get involved in whatever chaotic relationship was brewing between the two, quietly closed the door as if nothing had happened. Although life in the village was typically dull, there were occasional small disruptions. At least for the elves, Ash had managed to stir up quite a bit of commotion in their previously peaceful existence. Almost every elf, when they had the time, would be pulled into discussions about magic by him. Occasionally, Ash could be found lying under a tree in the village, quietly reading, studying, and practicing the magic he had learned from Ciri. After their daily magic training, Millie and Frieren often sat nearby, leisurely observing the human who had been in the village for nearly 2 years without them even noticing the passage of time. Millie, look at him, Frieren remarked. He's so busy every day. Feels like he won't make it past 100 years. What are you talking about, Frieren? Humans usually die in the blink of an eye, don't they? Seeing such a busy human, does it make lazy, dazed Millie feel anything at all? Are you touched? Millie, wine glass still in hand, lowered her head to think for a moment. Then she turned to her friend. Frieren has been calling me Millie a lot lately. You used to call me Millie Ald, didn't you? Is that so? Frieren's surprised expression slipped out unconsciously. Millie smiled and nodded, her gaze now fixed on Ash with renewed interest. He's quite an interesting human, they're really rare. Don't take it too seriously. Humans can die so easily. That's true. Millie nodded in agreement and didn't dwell on Ash's situation any longer. Instead, she continued sipping her wine, chatting with Frieren as usual. But that night, while everyone else in the village was sound asleep, Ash remained in the stone house, tirelessly practicing magic without pause. As dark clouds slowly covered the moon, a deep, quiet darkness descended upon the once peaceful elf village. For some unknown reason, the night seemed unnaturally still. Even the usual sounds of birds and animals had vanished, leaving a silence so profound it was almost eerie. In the stillness, the candlelight flickered faintly, casting long shadows that made the atmosphere feel unusually tense and cold. And amid this dead quiet, the lush forest at the edge of the village became the stage for something strange. Mottled moonlight filtered through the treetops, illuminating a group of mysterious figures draped in long robes. They moved like specters in the night, their bodies concealed beneath robes of various colors. Their heads were clearly not human, most of them adorned with horns, much like the demons of legend. Chapter 20, Who is it targeting? Pairs of dimly glowing eyes observed the village from the darkness. These uninvited guests seemed to be waiting for the moment when everyone had fallen asleep, making it easier for them to take action. However, Ash, who had been staying up late, felt that something was off. The atmosphere tonight was too abnormal. Without hesitation, he walked out of his room and, bang, kicked open Frieren's door. The door, which had been in disrepair for a long time, or perhaps weakened by him previously, fell down with a single kick, sending dust scattering across the ground. What now? Frieren, who had been lying in bed, sat up suddenly, glaring at him fiercely. I tried my best tonight, didn't I? Why are you tearing my door down? This isn't the time to talk about that. No. If you don't explain clearly, I won't let this go. There's danger, likely an enemy attack. Enemy attack? At this hour? Here. Frieren had never heard such words in all her years in the village. She was suspicious for a moment, wondering if Ash had been on the battlefield for too long and was becoming overly nervous, just like those old soldiers who grew paranoid, always thinking danger was lurking around. In this world, there was no official term like post-traumatic stress disorder, just as there hadn't been in ancient times. But that didn't mean such a condition didn't exist, it simply hadn't been diagnosed yet. Frieren, who had read about similar situations in books, couldn't help but look at Ash with sympathy. Should I cast a sleep spell on you? You, forget it. Just come with me. Wait. Before Frieren had a chance to refuse, Ash gave up on explaining and grabbed her by the ankles, dragging her off the bed. Effortlessly lifting her upside down, he walked out of the room with her in tow. Ash had performed this maneuver at least 5 times in the past 2 years, so although it was the first time he'd carried her out of her room, Frieren looked almost indifferent, as if resigned to her fate. While still trying to maintain some dignity by covering her skirt, she cast an irritated glance at him from below. You're the legendary hooligan, right? I'm not interested in children. I'm an elder. I'm not interested in old ladies either. Old lady, this is the second time. Frieren hadn't cared much initially, but when she heard these words again, a subtle shift occurred in her expression, as if she mentally jotted down his remarks in a little notebook. Ash, however, was focused elsewhere, surveying the area. Be quiet. Listen carefully. Don't you sense something wrong? You're the most suspicious person in this village right now. Put me down already. Do you even know what time it is? Frieren, still hanging upside down, glanced around but saw nothing unusual. Frustrated, she kicked his wrist. Her kick forced him to let go, and her head hit the ground with a thud. She immediately yelped in pain. Ow. How dare you? I've already, MMF. Quiet. Before Frieren could finish her complaints, Ash thrust his hand over her mouth, silencing her instantly. She was so confused that she forgot the pain and just stared blankly, looking at the bastard in front of her who had his fingers in her mouth. But it was then, as neither of them made any sound, that she finally noticed something unusual. The surroundings were much quieter than normal. In the village, deep within the forest, the absence of insects or birds singing at night was extremely rare. Even Frieren, despite her usual carefree nature, found this silence unsettling. Though she had grown up in the peaceful and overly comfortable village far from any kind of conflict, she finally sensed that something was wrong. She quickly pulled his finger out of her mouth, scanning the area vigilantly. What's going on? I don't know. But it seems like there might be an enemy nearby, lying in wait. Are they here for you? Me. He looked genuinely surprised as he pointed to himself. Frieren gave him an expressionless stare. Aren't you a defected general? Well, yes, but if they're after me, they're about 500 years too early. 500 years too early for what? More importantly, do you have any idea what's going on? This is probably something related to your people, right? Not at all. Having stayed in the village without ever venturing out, Frieren couldn't think of any reason why someone would attack. After all, the village hadn't experienced any kind of attack for countless years. In fact, it could be said that elves, by their very nature, rarely offended anyone when they left their village, which explained how they had survived in peace for so long. The truth is, the elves' longevity could largely be attributed to their peaceful temperament and tendency to avoid meddling in the affairs of others, which is why. Are you sure it's not because of you? After giving it more thought, Frieren turned back to him, unwilling to let the matter go. Come on, admit it. What did you do? Did I do anything? You're the only one here who could cause trouble. The nation I defected from is far, far away from here, so there's no way it's them. And since I've been here, I've just lived off my parents. I haven't done anything wrong. Lived off your parents? It means not working and relying on your elderly family members. You actually do that. Elves, once they became adults, always lived independently. Frieren found his behavior of living off his parents distasteful, and she couldn't help but wonder aloud, does that mean your parents are here to visit you? I seriously doubt it. Stop accusing me without reason. Clearly, this is something your people must have done. But we haven't offended anyone. Really. If everyone were like you, we wouldn't live that long, would we? Frieren gave him a sidelong glare, still keeping an eye on their surroundings. Ash shrugged. Who knows? Maybe someone has it out for a lazy person like you. I doubt it. Besides you, I can't imagine anyone hating me. Well, that's comforting, but maybe we should focus on how to handle the situation. I don't think we have to worry too much. After all, they're already here. As their conversation unfolded, the strange figures, or demons, that had been lurking around the village seemed to abandon their plan for a surprise attack. Instead, they emerged from the shadows, revealing themselves from all sides. Chapter 21, Fighting the Demon General. They quietly poured into the village from all directions. But when they noticed the two magicians standing in the center, the group of demons became bolder, no longer bothering to conceal their presence or aura. The leader was not a wizard, but a warrior wielding a giant sword, clad in heavy armor, with two massive demon horns sprouting from his head. Suddenly surrounded by this horde of demons, Ash and Frieren were instantly on high alert. Even the elves who had been sleeping peacefully in the village stirred, sensing the dangerous presence of these intruders who made no attempt to hide their power. Oh no. Should I run? Ash muttered, feeling the immense power radiating from the demon warrior leading them. He started to calculate how best to make a swift escape. Hearing him, Frieren turned to glare at him sharply. So this is your fault, isn't it? No, I don't think so, there shouldn't be any reason. Ash stammered, genuinely confused. After all, he had spent most of his time in the southern countries, rarely encountering demons. But if anyone had been offended, it certainly wasn't the elves. Could humans have hired demons to kill someone? Or perhaps the demons had learned of his refusal to join their ranks and decided to eliminate him. But then again, how many demons were actually interested in joining the Demon King in the first place? His puzzled expression made Frieren even more suspicious. It was you, wasn't it? Huh? No, it shouldn't be, should it? Ash was now uncertain himself. Meanwhile, the massive demon warrior, who stood over 5 meters tall and brandished an enormous sword, spoke with a low, booming voice. This was Basalt, a general of the Demon King's throne. Human magician, this has nothing to do with you. Huh? It's not my problem. Ash was surprised to hear that. Basalt, growing impatient, clarified, the Demon King has ordered the extermination of all elves. Your life is irrelevant. Really? Thanks. Ash grinned, turning to Frieren with a cheerful expression. See? It's not about me, it's your problem. Coward, Frieren muttered, not even bothering to look at him. Her focus remained on Basalt. If you want to flee, go ahead. Stop embarrassing yourself here. That's harsh. Do I really seem like that kind of person to you? How would I know what kind of person you are? How long have I even known you? We've known each other for 2 years. Only 2 years. Maybe I should just leave. Ash rubbed his face in frustration, casting a glance back at the demon General Basalt, who stood with his sword at the ready. Basalt, clearly growing more irritable, grumbled, I've told you already, it's your choice, leave or stay. If it weren't for his current mission and the need to conserve his strength, Basalt would have preferred to kill them both right then and there. Oh, forget it, Ash sighed. I'm not like these cold-hearted elves. I've been living here for 2 years, so I've grown attached to the place. Is that so? Then, kill them all. Basalt's eyes gleamed with a chilling light, and without hesitation, he raised his giant sword high. The demons instantly sprang into action, casting spells or charging forward with their weapons raised. Meanwhile, the villagers, jolted awake by the commotion, scrambled to organize their weapons or quickly prepared to cast defensive magic. At that moment, Ash unsheathed the saber he always carried and stepped forward. I'll take care of the big guy. You handle the rest. Really? That would help a lot, Frieren replied, a little surprised, but she raised her hand without hesitation. Instantly, lights of various colors began to illuminate the entire village as her magic took effect. Pathetic, truly pathetic, Basalt muttered as he observed Ash approaching with the saber in hand. Beneath his helmet, a sneer formed on his face. A magician thinking he can fight a warrior with a sword. Are you begging for death? No, you've misunderstood, Ash said calmly. This is just for making it easier to harvest lives after using magic. I call it Reaper number 7. What nonsense is that? Don't worry, it'll be over soon. You're mocking me, aren't you? Although Basalt wasn't among the most famous or powerful generals, he was still a demon general. Being treated with such indifference in this small village enraged him. That's not it at all, I'm just. Die. Basalt, too angry to listen further, let his rage take over and raised his enormous sword, swinging it down with full force, aiming to crush Ash beneath its weight. The massive blade sliced through the air with a deafening whistle. Yet Ash didn't flinch, standing firm despite the sheer size difference between them. He swung his saber up to meet Basalt's attack, intending to counter the blow. Bang! The two weapons collided, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Unable to resist Basalt's overwhelming strength, Ash's body was forced backward, his feet digging 2 long trenches into the ground as he struggled to hold his ground. The transformation worked, but even turning myself into a warrior, fighting a monster like this head-on isn't smart, Ash muttered, glancing at his hand gripping the saber. Blood dripped from his thumb where the pressure had torn the skin. In this world, the difference between a magician and a warrior lies in how magic is used to enhance one's body and attacks. The transformation spell, which Ash called Reaper Mode, was supposed to make him a warrior. Yet, even with the transformation, he was still no match for this opponent. But Basalt, unaware of Ash's internal thoughts, instinctively took half a step back but felt deeply insulted when he saw Ash still standing. A mere human, a mere magician. With a roar, Basalt swung his massive sword once more, creating a powerful wind as he aimed to cleave Ash in half. But this time, Ash didn't dodge or flinch. He suddenly stomped on the ground with force. The earth trembled violently, and purple lightning sparked around him, crackling with the force of gravity. The ground within a 6-meter radius around Ash began to fracture as if struck by an immense invisible force. Basalt's massive sword, entering the affected zone, was forced off course, missing Ash's head by mere millimeters. The blade only grazed his clothes before slamming into the ground like a thunderous cannon. Boom! The ground, already weakened by Basalt's immense weight and strength, finally crumbled, splitting apart from the force of the blow. Chapter 22, Attack and Defense Alternation. _____. A massive sword, larger than anything a warrior might wield, crashed down, and under the influence of the strange gravity, the earth trembled and split apart. Although the dust was affected by the abnormal gravity, rising in an oddly erratic way, bits of rock still exploded outward, with some striking Ash, causing him to wince in pain. Millie, who had just rushed out of her room, witnessed this scene. She had initially been worried that Ash would be easily defeated, but what she saw now was utterly shocking. In the past, Ash had always been so serious and diligent about magic, to the point that even an elf like Millie couldn't help but admire his commitment. It was precisely this hard-working attitude that had brought him to this moment, allowing him to remain absolutely confident in his abilities and magic. Even in the face of death, where the slightest mistake could result in him being cut in half, Ash refused to retreat. Of course, that's how Millie perceived it. In truth, no one noticed the cold sweat trickling down Ash's face, nor that his body had stiffened. In reality, it wasn't that Ash didn't want to retreat. It was simply the first time he had used his Gravity Thunder spell, which he had painstakingly developed by merging his own research with the gravity magic of the mythological era. And in the heat of the moment, he had misjudged his step, driving his foot too deep into the gravity-compacted ground. As a result, he was stuck. The gravity had made the earth beneath him harder than concrete, and though his body hadn't crumbled under the pressure, he couldn't move. It was a testament to his strong physique that his legs hadn't snapped under the weight. Fortunately, when Ash leaned backward, his head narrowly avoided being split like a watermelon on a hot summer day. But before Ash could fully process his luck, Basalt, the towering demon before him, was equally stunned. Though Basalt had no idea why his sword had suddenly grown much heavier and harder to control, he knew this bizarre shift was somehow the work of the human standing before him. It doesn't matter whether you're a magician or a warrior. Today, you will die. Basalt growled, his eyes flashing with a mix of arrogance and cruelty. After another failed strike, Basalt, now fully enraged, decided to go all out. He slammed his foot into the ground and charged straight into the field of abnormal gravity. With a thunderous roar, like that of a massive tank, he swung his colossal sword in a wide diagonal arc, aiming to crush Ash like a tornado of death. Just as the blade approached, the gravity surrounding both Basalt and his sword vanished. The massive blade whistled through the air, missing Ash by inches as he ducked low and dashed underneath it. Without missing a beat, Ash shot beneath the sword and slashed at Basalt's legs. A thin trail of blood followed his swift strike, as he moved past the demon general. It was only a moment later that Basalt registered the sharp pain in his heel. His eyes widened as the sensation hit, but he quickly dismissed the wound as insignificant. However, the blood, now free from the previously altered gravity, gushed out like a burst dam, splattering around them. The heavy armor Basalt wore pressed down on the wound, amplifying the pain. Unable to withstand it, the powerful demon general dropped to his knees. Basalt was left speechless, unable to comprehend the sight before him. How could a mere magician, who should have been helpless in close combat, not only stand his ground but bring a demon general to his knees? The thought seemed absurd. How was such a feat even possible? Was there really a magician who could excel in both magic and physical combat? Before Basalt could make sense of it, Ash charged forward once more, sword in hand. This time, as he advanced, the gravity around them shifted again, fluctuating wildly. It was in this constant cycle of gravity shifts that Basalt realized something crucial. The transitions between Ash's magic and his physical movements weren't instantaneous, it took time for him to switch between the two states. As this realization dawned on him, Basalt narrowed his eyes, preparing to exploit this newfound weakness. The next moment, Basalt swung his giant sword, sweeping it across the ground with a thunderous bang, raising a thick cloud of sand and dust that completely obscured Ash from view. Through the swirling debris, the massive blade cut through the air, hurtling toward Ash. Basalt, feeling confident in his quick reaction, believed his opponent would retreat instead of pressing the attack. As the blade closed in, Ash instinctively raised his saber in a hasty backhand block. However, his rushed defense lacked the strength to match the brute force behind Basalt's powerful swing. With a resounding boom, Ash was sent flying, the force of the blow creating a fierce wind as he sailed through the air. He crashed into the wall of a nearby building, smashing through the already crumbling stone, disappearing from sight as he landed somewhere within. It seemed Ash had been defeated, but no one at the scene paid any attention to his condition, or perhaps they simply didn't have the luxury of doing so. The battlefield was filled with cries of battle, but in truth, the fight between the demons and the elves had become heavily one-sided. Apart from Frieren and Millie, the elves were struggling, and the air was filled with not only roars but also the screams of the dying. The elves had no spare strength to check on Ash, and Basalt was too preoccupied to care. With swift, determined steps, he charged toward the stone house, his sword raised high, and swung it down in front of the building. The already dilapidated stone house crumbled further, losing an entire wall as it collapsed under the force of the blow. As smoke and dust filled the air, obscuring his vision, Basalt continued to swing his sword wildly, slashing through the haze in an attempt to kill his hidden opponent. But before he could deliver another blow, the dust and debris in the air suddenly froze, suspended by an unseen force. The particles hovered momentarily before. Boom. A powerful shockwave sent the sand and gravel flying like shotgun pellets, catching Basalt off guard. The debris pelted his armor with a relentless crackle, though it didn't penetrate the thick plating. However, a small hole was punched into his mask. "You're just being clever." Basalt growled in pain, unable to open his eyes for a moment. Out of caution, he refrained from moving, instead waving his sword wildly in all directions, forcing Ash to keep his distance. But Ash had northwest intention of getting close. He hurled his saber into the sky, and purple lightning began crackling in his palm. Slamming his hand into the ground, he sent the lightning coursing forward like a serpent, racing toward Basalt. As the purple electricity surged across the ground, it left deep scorch marks and cracks in its wake, and in moments, it coiled around Basalt. Maximum gravity was applied at that instant. The earth groaned beneath the weight, and the ground within a 3-meter radius sank as if buckling under the immense pressure. Basalt, already weakened from his leg injuries, was unable to resist the concentrated gravity. He was forced to one knee, blood spurting from his feet. The moment his knee hit the ground, the immense weight of his body and armor, combined with the abnormal gravity, caused the ground beneath him to collapse further. The earth couldn't support him, and it gave way, sinking over a meter deep. Basalt now found himself in a dire situation. His body was battered, gravity continued to crush him, and his feet were trapped in the compacted earth. He struggled to stand, but his legs were firmly wedged in the ground. He could only fight to keep himself from falling completely. Chapter 23, Thank You, You Bad Guy. ______. Faced with the dilemma of being unable to pull his feet out of the compacted soil, Ash felt frustrated, but Basalt, on the other hand, saw it as a tremendous humiliation. "I will kill you. I will definitely kill you, human. I'll wait a second." Dusting himself off, Ash glanced at the position of the sword and smiled, shaking his head. "You might have misunderstood something." "What?" "Actually, I'm a demon." "What?" With no one else around, Ash revealed the truth with a smile, which left Basalt stunned. He even suspected that Ash might be deceiving him. Before Basalt could respond, Ash raised his hand and pointed to the sky. "Take a look." "Huh." Instinctively, Basalt glanced upwards, spotting a silver object falling rapidly from the sky. The speed was terrifying, as if it had been flung high by the earlier repulsive force and was now plunging back down, pulled by gravity. But faced with this rapidly falling blade, Basalt found himself powerless to dodge. His heart raced as instinctive fear gripped him, his pupils shrinking at the sight. Before he could lower his head, the blade, with dazzling sparks, pierced through his head armor, stabbing directly into his forehead. Blood poured from the helmet, and his enormous body trembled momentarily before collapsing with a thunderous crash. Seeing this, Ash smiled in satisfaction. "I thought if it didn't work, I'd have to drag this fight out a bit, but the result turned out better than expected." Had the blade pierced just a little less deeply, the two of them might have been locked in a stalemate. This success made Ash resolute. He would definitely buy a giant sword in the future. As Basalt fell, his consciousness faded quickly, and unfortunately, even in his final moments, he still couldn't figure out whether Ash was a human or a demon. Ash, however, didn't spare him another glance. After making up his mind about acquiring a giant sword, he shifted his magic power and charged at the remaining demons, finishing them off swiftly. Even though they belonged to the same race, Ash felt no hesitation in killing them. Just like humans would kill each other, demons killing their own kind was equally common. This kind of conflict carried no psychological burden. And in this case, he was even more comfortable doing it, as he had some level of familiarity with the elves. After all, not every demon was loyal to the Demon King. Most who appeared to be were simply acting out of fear. Demons, at their core, were loyal only to themselves. Many of the great demons were powerful enough that they didn't concern themselves with the demon king or even the survival of their race. The very structure of demon society meant they had a weak sense of racial loyalty. By the time the sounds of battle in the village had completely died down, the demon clan's night attack was finally over. But flames and smoke still rose from the village, casting a heavy shadow over the area. Since demons left no remains after death, the ground was now littered primarily with the corpses of fallen elves, their bodies strewn across the blood-soaked earth. The expressions of the surviving villagers were grim, but surprisingly, no one broke into tears. Some were even calmer than Ash had expected. I can't help but feel they're as cold as the demons. Are they just a peaceful version of demons? Ash, feeling a bit melancholic about the death of someone familiar, walked past the corpses. He glanced at Frieren, who was staring at her fallen companion's body with a blank expression, and couldn't help but sigh. Frieren looked up, clearly displeased. Are you ready to be punched for saying something like that right now? Don't get me wrong. I was just voicing a thought. I didn't expect you to hear me since I said it so quietly. Normally, I wouldn't say such things out loud. It's even worse to say it behind someone's back. Well, are you planning to hit me, the person who just helped you? If you can do that, then I truly admire you. Do whatever you want. Pathetic. I just helped you, didn't I? Thank you, pathetic one, but I'm not in the mood for a chat right now. Frieren lowered her tired eyes as she glanced at the bodies of her fallen companions. Her arm was still bleeding, but it was temporarily bandaged with gauze. Millie, who had performed some emergency first aid, approached and sighed. This village can't survive any longer. It's time to move on. What are you planning to do? Is that what you're thinking about right now? You're even colder than I am. Ash gave her a bewildered look. Millie just shrugged. I can't help it. Everyone here is so distant. The only one I'm even remotely familiar with is Frieren. I see. It felt as though these elves were, indeed, a peaceful version of demons. This time, however, Ash kept that thought to himself, sighing at their apparent indifference. He collected himself and, thinking of Ciri, who also showed little concern for her own people, he stopped dwelling on it. Glancing at the corpses scattered around them, he suggested, anyway, before we move on, we should at least take care of these bodies, don't you think? That's all we can do for now. Frieren sighed softly, saying nothing more to him. Quietly, she and the other elves began to tend to the fallen. Before they could finish, however, an unfamiliar figure stepped into the ravaged village, a late arrival. Coincidentally, it was someone Ash barely knew, Flam, his senior sister. Chapter 24, The Belated Arrival of Flam, The Duties of a Disciple. ___________. Flam noticed the signs of battle in the distance and the beam of light cutting through the air. She rushed over but arrived a moment too late. When she got to the scene, the battle had ended. To her surprise, many villagers were still alive. The demon general's armor and weapons lay abandoned on the ground, which indicated that the villagers had not only survived but also managed to defeat their enemies. In disbelief, she thought to herself, they actually won. What? Ash, she muttered as she spotted him. Oh, isn't this my dear senior sister? How have you been these days? Ash replied casually. No, this is only our second meeting, right? What's with that blank expression and strange greeting, dear? Flam looked at Ash with bewilderment, wondering, is he mocking me? That's a misunderstanding. I just want to improve our relationship and break the ice. Setting that aside for now, were you the one who dealt with this guy? Flam glanced at the remains of Basalt's armor, but Ash pointed at Frieren and said, not entirely, since this one over here helped out. This one? The strange introduction made Frieren, who was dragging a corpse, turn and shoot Ash an irritated look. Flam, still confused, asked, what are you even doing here? Obviously, I came here to study. But I don't know how I got caught up in this mess. Ash sighed dramatically and shook his head. Before Flam could respond, Ash changed the subject, asking, by the way, you should have returned by now, right? How is Ciri doing? I mean, how's she feeling lately? She's feeling inexplicably good, probably because you're not around. That's such a shame. I'm doing my best to fulfill my role as her disciple. I heard the master has been looking after you instead. Is that what you call being a responsible disciple? You don't understand. With your short lifespan and my weaknesses, who knows when I'll die? I've got to make sure she can take care of herself when I'm not around, right? What you're saying makes sense, but aren't you just too lazy to do it yourself? Yes, that's exactly it. Ash nodded in agreement so earnestly that Frieren, who was standing nearby, didn't know what to say. Flam, on the other hand, held her forehead in exasperation. She could already feel a headache coming on and couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for her master, who had raised such an oddball disciple. Still, she decided to let it go for the moment. He's as strange as our master, she thought, just in his own way. Flam turned her attention to the group, particularly to Frieren, the strongest one among them. As she watched Frieren continue to drag the bodies, Flam began speaking to her. The two appeared to be discussing something, but Ash wasn't quite sure what. Not that he cared. He simply dug a pit to bury the fallen elves, and then sat beside it, sipping the wine Millie had given him. So, what are you going to do next, Millie? He took a sip and glanced at the elf beside him. Are you going to just live a life of doing nothing? Is that even an option? Millie replied. Sure. I don't want to end up like you. You should be more careful. The demons are slaughtering elves. Why don't you try learning some magic? Well, I'll be more cautious next time. Millie, who was always lively yet somehow quirky for an elf, stood up with a smile and began walking toward Frieren. She waved goodbye to Ash without turning around and called out, I'm off. Hopefully, we'll get the chance to meet again sometime. Bye. Even though they said their goodbyes, they both knew that, without any sort of agreement, meeting again in such a vast world was unlikely, almost a luxury. Millie, without mentioning it further, smiled as she went to say her goodbyes to Frieren. After burying their fallen comrades, the other villagers also prepared to leave. But before that, Ash and Frieren departed first, accompanied by Flam, who, for reasons unknown, had decided to take Frieren as her apprentice. Speaking of which, Frieren. Ash, now carrying Frieren on his back, suddenly looked back as if he had just remembered something. Hearing his unexpectedly excited tone, Frieren, who was lying on his back, became immediately suspicious. What is it? You've become Flam's disciple, right? Doesn't that make you my nephew? In that case, shouldn't you call me Uncle Master? Are you forgetting that I also taught you magic? She countered, unimpressed. Well then, how about this, I'll call you my nephew, and you can just call me by my name. We can each mind our own business. Deal. No matter how you put it, I'm the one who'd be losing out. So, no, Frieren replied, turning her head away, clearly uninterested in continuing this ridiculous conversation. Flam, walking beside them, placed a hand on her forehead, refusing to get involved in this strange exchange. Just as Ash was about to keep pressing the matter, 3 cloaked demons suddenly appeared at the side of the road. Initially, they had concealed themselves, but upon seeing that the trio were magicians, they emerged, much like Basalt had done earlier, demanding they hand over the elf. Demons are predictable like this, Flam began, speaking to no one in particular. Though they're deceitful and cunning, they also pride themselves on their magic. They'll never attack a magician by surprise. They always want a fair fight. While she spoke in an oddly casual and vulgar tone, Flam let Frieren down from Ash's back, signaling that he was about to surrender. However, she continued talking slowly. You see, when it comes to magic, demons are arrogant. They have full confidence in the spells they've studied for years. In other words, they're just pompous idiots. Without warning, Flam raised her hand, and a golden light flashed. In the blink of an eye, the hillside nearby transformed into a massive crater over 20 meters wide from the explosion. After this display, Flam turned back to Ash and Frieren, her expression calm and indifferent. They were skilled magicians, but even the most skilled can die from a simple mistake. Magicians live an extreme life, our bodies are much weaker than those of warriors. If we're careless, even a child could kill us. Is that why you've been concealing your magic power? Ash asked, noting the intense aura now emanating from her. But how long have you been hiding it? Surely not all the time. Exactly. By making the enemy misjudge my power, I deceive them and take their life, disgracing the so-called noble art of magic. That's my most despicable tactic. You're a bit strange, Ash remarked, raising an eyebrow. You were just calling magic bullshit, but now you're calling it noble. At the end of her speech, Flam lowered her eyes, a sorrowful expression on her face. It became clear to Ash that she was speaking more to herself than anyone else, certainly not to the now obliterated demons. I love magic, but I also hate it. Ha ha. Anyway, let's head back, Flam said, changing the subject. We need to inform the master that we've accepted a new disciple. Ignoring Ash's perplexed expression, Flam started walking ahead, not waiting for a response. Ash, feeling somewhat helpless, continued to carry Frieren on his back as he followed behind. The one thing they were grateful for, after being attacked repeatedly, was that they were heading in a different direction from Millie. Since the demons had come from elsewhere, they didn't need to worry about the safety of the villagers or Millie for the time being. Chapter 25 What a Proper Disciple Should Be Like. At the first light of dawn, the sky was turning a soft, pale blue, with a delicate mist lingering over the winding river. 3 figures walked slowly through the haze. Although Flam had mentioned they were going to report to her master, she didn't seem to be in any particular hurry. They took their time along the way, more like tourists than people on a mission. At times, they would pause in a flower-filled meadow to enjoy the tranquility, or climb onto large rocks to take in the scenic views of green waters and lush mountains. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, casting dappled shadows across their path. Their journey felt more like a casual outing than a serious quest. Despite this relaxed pace, Flam still taught Frieren as they traveled. Ash, always eager to learn, joined in, though this caused Flam a bit of a headache. She seemed to have some unspoken concerns, but in the end, she brushed them aside and continued teaching them both. It took the trio nearly half a year to cross the border into the neighboring country, their slow progress due to the leisurely nature of their journey. They rarely covered more than a few steps each day. When they finally neared the ruins where Ciri lived, they stopped at the expansive flower fields beside the ruins, intending to rest there for the night. The ruins were likely still in disrepair, so camping outside seemed like the best option. The flower field stretched as far as the eye could see, like a carefully arranged tapestry spread out beneath the sky. The sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the blossoms, creating a scene reminiscent of a fairy tale. Yet, despite the beauty of the sight, Frieren showed no interest, stepping directly on the flowers as she walked. Come to think of it, why is there such a large flower field here? Ash asked, picking a small bunch of flowers and glancing at Flam curiously. This. Flam smiled as she looked at the sea of blooms. This is a gift I created for my master. Ciri. Really? Is she that into flowers? No, not really. Master doesn't seem to like them much. Then what's the point? Ash asked, puzzled. I like them, Flam replied simply. Doesn't seem like something that suits you. I know, she said, looking wistfully over the flowers. But this was the first magic my parents taught me when I was little. It's the reason I fell in love with magic in the first place. This sea of flowers is big enough that, even when I'm no longer around, it will still be here to keep my master company. That's how I see it. Frieren, who had been listening silently to their conversation, widened her eyes slightly, feeling a bit confused by Flam's words. Turning to Ash, she asked, I understand the master's reasons, but what about you? Why do you like magic so much? For survival, Ash answered, playing with the flowers in his hand, a faint trace of helplessness in his expression. And, my sister has high hopes for me. Then you should strive not to disappoint her, Frieren said earnestly. Actually, I think it's better to let her down, Ash replied with a sigh. Huh. Frieren blinked, baffled. The master's explanation and Ash's response left her confused. She couldn't quite grasp the complexity of human emotions. Flam noticed Frieren's confusion and sighed, patting her shoulder gently. Don't worry too much about it. It's not just you, most people don't understand what he means. The next day, they left the sea of flowers and ventured deep into the ruins. Eventually, they arrived in the familiar, grand hall. At the far end of the hall, the petite blonde elf, Ciri, sat on her throne, looking as bored as ever. As they entered, Frieren followed Flam's lead, kneeling on one knee before her master. At this moment, Ciri showed an amused smile but turned her gaze toward Ash, who was sitting cross-legged beside her, reading a book. "Hey, kid over there, did you see that? This is how a proper disciple should behave. Can you stop picking on me all of a sudden? Besides, don't you hate all that formal etiquette stuff?" Ash replied without even looking up, his eyes still glued to the book in his hands. "Who said that? What I value most is etiquette. Then how about you stop putting your feet on the chair and actually sit properly?" Ash glanced at Ciri, who wasn't sitting, standing, or even squatting in a proper manner. He was too tired to even complain further. "Tisk, you're really sharp when it comes to these things." Being chided by her own disciple made Ciri click her tongue. "Who do you think has been supporting you this whole time? Instead of that, why don't you let Flam and Frieren get up already? I don't mind. I'm the elder here, after all. And this whole situation. You caused it." "What? Feeling guilty now?" "Not at all. I'm not the one kneeling, nor the one being knelt to, so this has nothing to do with me. Where's your sense of responsibility? Please don't expect too much from someone my age, okay? Forget it, I'll deal with you later." Ciri paused mid-sentence, then looked at the two still kneeling before her. Her smile softened, a stark contrast to the one she gave Ash. "Time flies. I took on a disciple out of curiosity, and now there's a grand disciple so soon." "This is Frieren," Flam said, smiling and nodding. "Elves, huh? Impressive. I like that. Tell me, what magic do you want to learn? I'll teach you." "Is this what Ash mentioned before, the transfer of magic?" Frieren asked. "Yes, I've mastered almost all magic. Just name it, and I'll let you have it instantly. Give it to Ash." "What?" Ciri was stunned for a moment. She then shot a look of annoyance at Ash. Are you coercing her? The process of exploring magic is the most exciting part. That's why I declined. And Ash didn't even want it, but he offered it to me," Frieren explained. "You're really shameless." Ciri rolled her eyes at Ash after hearing that. Ash, completely unfazed, responded naturally, "Fortune favors the bold. Ugh, I'll deal with you later." Ciri waved him off, turning back to Flam. "Your disciple has no drive. She lacks that endless ambition. I think." "You're even worse," Ciri interrupted. "Too much ambition. I hate that too." As soon as Ash opened his mouth to speak, Ciri shut him down with one simple remark. Chapter 26 Frieren, I bet there's something in that treasure chest. _________. The obvious difference in treatment made Ash too tired to even complain. However, his frustrated expression made Frieren, who was half kneeling beside him, suppress a laugh. Given the formal nature of the occasion, she tried her hardest not to burst out laughing. But Ash wasn't one to simply accept defeat. He grabbed a few more books from the nearby shelf and casually walked out, saying, "I'm heading out. You guys can chat all you want. I'll be back by dinner. Don't come back. I won't be making dinner for you." Ciri waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing away a stray cat or dog. It was clear she wasn't too keen on him returning for the meal. Seeing this, Flem couldn't help but chuckle. Master seems to like this new disciple quite a bit. Like him? What are you talking about? Are you blind already? You're not even 40 yet, Ciri shot back, rolling her eyes. No, it just feels like there's something similar about him. That's your blindness speaking, Ciri responded, not wanting to entertain her disciple's odd behavior. She glanced toward the door, muttering to herself, is it really that kid's fault? Although she said that, it was probably too late to go after him now. She sighed and decided to discipline him properly once he returned. He always caused trouble, and, much like her, he didn't care much for following rules. But of course, she didn't care. After all, she was the elder and didn't need to follow or understand any rules, but the younger generation couldn't behave like that, right? Still, despite her thoughts, Ash had no intention of returning anytime soon. He knew if he went back, he'd just be compared to the more obedient disciples and get an earful about how others behaved better. So, with a fresh magic book in hand, Ash decided to prolong his absence. Though it was a bit of a shame that he couldn't mooch off his master for food, it at least saved him from that headache. As he ignored what was going on inside, he noticed a strange smile on Frieren's face when she returned. No matter how much he asked, Frieren wouldn't explain her expression. Annoyed, he decided to ignore it. The girl, seemingly lost in thought, flipped through a book and muttered, "People these days are really, never mind. By the way, Ash, has this ruin been fully explored?" she suddenly asked. "No, not really. Ciri isn't interested, and I'm lazy," he replied. Maybe there's treasure waiting for us," she mused. Ash wasn't inclined to engage at first, but once Frieren got her answer, her excitement about exploring the maze peaked again. "Us? Did you just volunteer me without my permission? You're not going. What if there's a magic book Ciri hasn't discovered yet? Fine. Let's go." In just a moment, Ash, who had initially planned to firmly refuse, found himself tempted. He closed the magic book in his hand, stood up, and took the lead. This made Frieren smile. "You really do love magic." "I can't help it. I'm curious about the unknown, and it's essential for survival. You also have your sister to look out for, right? But now that I think about it, I've never heard much about her. That's a troublesome subject. Let's not talk about it." "Really? Well, let's move on then." If it had been anyone else, they would have pressed further, but Frieren didn't. She quickly caught up with Ash and started walking toward the depths of the ruins. Her restraint surprised him. The two of them worked together, easily clearing the underground ruins. Of course, there wasn't any real danger, the more powerful threats had long been dealt with by Ciri. Soon, an ancient treasure chest appeared in front of them, but... "What are you doing just squatting there?" "I already used magic to check it out, it's just a treasure chest monster." Ash glanced at Frieren, who was squatting in front of the chest, seemingly unwilling to move. He was tempted to grab her by the collar and drag her away. Frieren turned around and said seriously, "You said it yourself, there's a 1% chance your magic could be wrong, right? It's basically accurate. But it's precisely those great magicians who see through that 1% who make historic discoveries. You're saying you're one of those great magicians. I can feel it." Instead of replying directly, she gently stroked the dilapidated treasure chest with confidence. "There's a valuable magic book inside." "Based on what?" "My experience as a magician." "But you just left the village, didn't you?" "I've walked with you all the way here." "You've never been to any ruins." "What kind of experience are you talking about?" "I'm talking about my instincts as a magician. Trust me, Ash. There's a magic book in here." With that, she suddenly opened the treasure chest. The next moment, a giant mouth, instead of the magic book she had imagined, shot out and swallowed her whole in the blink of an eye, leaving only half of her body sticking out. Ash, who had wisely been standing a bit farther back, sighed in exasperation. "I told you already, but you still pretended to be an expert. You were so confident, I almost believed your lies." He wanted to turn around and walk away, pretending not to know this embarrassing person, but Frieren, who was lying there like a rag doll, suddenly began frantically wiggling her exposed rear and cried out desperately. "Ah! It's so dark. So scary. Get me out of here, Ash. Are you still there? Get me out. It's pitch black in here, and I'm terrified. Are you a child? You're old enough, and you're still scared of the dark." Looking at her butt, which was surprisingly plump compared to her petite frame and wiggling uncontrollably, Ash couldn't resist giving it a light slap. "Ouch. Who just hit me? This is terrifying. I can't see anything." "Ash, was that you? There was a monster earlier. When I killed it, its tail accidentally hit you." "Really? Why does it feel like?" "Doesn't matter if you believe me or not. I'm leaving now." "I believe you. Get me out. It's so scary in here." Trapped inside the treasure chest, Frieren had no choice but to tearfully plead with Ash for help. Chapter 27, Frieren's Story Never Tries. Although Frieren was reluctant, she knew that if she didn't want to use magic to attack the treasure chest monster, she had to temporarily compromise with Ash. The reason she avoided using magic was that, in such a confined space, the spell could easily backfire and cause more trouble, so she preferred not to resort to it unless absolutely necessary. The sight of Frieren, scared of the dark and wiggling her hips in panic, was so amusing to Ash that he was tempted to give her a few more smacks. However, knowing that dealing with the aftermath would be more trouble than it was worth, he decided against it, since he hated unnecessary hassle. Instead, Ash reached out, grabbed her legs from behind, and began pulling her out, like trying to uproot a stubborn carrot, attempting to extract Frieren from the treasure chest monster's gaping mouth. After a few hard pulls, Lillian screamed in pain, "Wait, wait. It hurts. It really hurts. I'm going to break in half." "Well, that's on you. Even if you wanted to take a risk, shouldn't you have cut it open with a knife first to check? Ancient magic books are fragile. Even a tiny scratch could ruin them. What if cutting it damages the treasure inside? You're still arguing. Do you even understand the situation you're in? Whatever. Just get me out. It's terrifying in here." At that moment, Frieren, usually calm and composed, seemed unusually vulnerable, like a frightened child. Ash felt it was a pity to let her off so easily, but keeping her in that state wasn't ideal either. Since her attitude had softened, there was no need to continue teasing her. With a sigh, Ash got serious. He moved to the front, grabbed the treasure chest monster's gaping mouth with both hands, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled with all his might. A loud, fabric-like rip echoed as the monster's mouth was forcibly pried open. Frieren, who had been partially swallowed, was jerked free. Her legs were still stuck but quickly flew out of the monster's maw. After briefly floating in the air, she crashed onto the ground with a thud, leaving her momentarily speechless from the pain. The sight of the treasure chest monster, now defeated and dripping with saliva, made Ash cringe in disgust, prompting him to keep his distance. "Ugh, it's so gross, and it hurts. This is unbearable," Frieren groaned as she lay on the ground, her face full of misery while she tried to fix her disheveled hair. As she did, she glanced at Ash with tear-filled eyes, clearly upset by his indifference. "What? Aren't you going to thank me for all the trouble I went through? Wasn't it you who hit me earlier?" "Nope," Ash responded curtly, avoiding her gaze. Faced with Frieren's resentful pout and teary eyes, Ash silently turned his head away, pretending not to hear her, with no intention of admitting anything. Seeing this, Frieren narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "No. It was definitely you. Stop imagining things. Didn't I just save you? Anne, what did you call me earlier?" Recalling how Ash had stood by, almost enjoying her distress while she was nearly swallowed whole, Frieren sat up abruptly and fixed him with an intense stare. "Did I say something?" Ash asked, feigning ignorance. "We are already quite old. What's wrong with that? You called me old again." Frieren turned her head to glare at him. 3 times is the limit. There won't be a next time, no. This time is the 3rd time. What? What 3rd time? You called me an old woman twice before. Did I? Yes. Frieren nodded vigorously, certain of her claim. This left him speechless. What are you counting such an insignificant matter for? Are you really that vindictive? Wait a moment, I'll show you how powerful I am. What do you want to do? Seeing the girl who seemed to be plotting something, Ash instinctively tensed, ready to run at the slightest change in her demeanor. The next moment. Woo. Whoa. What? What's happening? Noticing she had completed her plan, Ash had already taken 2 steps back. The loud wailing behind him made him freeze in shock, and he turned back blankly. The girl who had just vowed to teach him a lesson was now curled up in a corner, hugging her knees and crying loudly. He was so baffled that he stopped running and stared at Flam, who had appeared beside him, looking equally astonished. What is she doing? I don't know. You guys are more familiar with each other, right? What's going on? You're asking me. Who should I ask? You're the master. Why don't you just coax her? I don't care if you make her cry. It was clear that Flam didn't want to get involved, so she left on her own after saying this. This left Ash standing there, unsure whether to leave or stay. He held his forehead with one hand, pondering for a long time. Finally, he couldn't help but flick her long ear. Frieren, I was wrong. I won't say you're old in the future, okay? Even though he had been forced to surrender, Frieren simply shook his hand off and cried even louder. This made him give up on the idea of leaving the area first. However, he hadn't anticipated that she would follow him, even while crying. He was compelled to ignore this strange girl by burying himself in a book. And so, this process dragged on for 3 days and 3 nights. Even though her tears had dried up, she showed no intention of stopping. You need to think of a solution quickly. This is all your fault, right? The non-stop crying had driven Flam to cover her ears in pain. Even Ciri, who had lived deep within the ruins and hadn't come out for ages, was annoyed by the constant noise. She emerged for the first time, glared at him, and issued an ultimatum: if you don't fix this, I'll throw her out with you. I didn't cry, why are you blaming me? This is all your fault. But forget it. He still wanted to explain himself, but in the end, he simply carried Frieren on his shoulders and left quickly, hoping to avoid being kicked out because of her. There was no way around it. Besides himself, there were only 3 other people in this ruin. One of them had been made to cry by him, and the other 2 were still blaming him. If he didn't deal with this girl who was crying so miserably for no reason, it would be difficult for him to return. He stepped outside the ruins and finally got to see the sky. As soon as he set the girl down on the grass, Frieren stopped crying. She crossed her arms, raised her head, and revealed a smug smile that was completely different from her usual expressionless demeanor. How's it going? Do you know how powerful I am? What is wrong with this girl? Can I beat her up? Can I? Of course I can. Watching her mood shift so rapidly from sadness to joy left Ash so confused that his eyes twitched slightly, and his fists clenched unconsciously. Chapter 28, Differences in Concepts. Ash could barely suppress the urge to hit someone, but Frieren, sharp as always, noticed his clenched fist right away. But instead of being afraid, she wiped the smile off her face and warned him, her tone serious, "What's wrong? Are you planning to hit me, Ash?" "What? You really think I wouldn't? If you hit me now, I'll cry for another 3 days." Her tone wasn't threatening or oppressive, just matter of fact, with her head tilted slightly. But the mere thought of being tortured by 3 more days of crying made Ash's raised hand freeze in midair. Slowly, he lowered it. Instead, he placed his hand on Frieren's head and ruffled her hair roughly, forcing a twisted smile. "Seriously, can't you act a bit more like an adult? What kind of threat is that? Or are you just a kid at heart?" Again. Frieren stared at him, expressionless. "Wait, what?" Again. "What's wrong? Are you threatening me?" "No, it's a warning." 3 times was a typo. Twice, you know the drill. Fine. You win. Good, now take your hand off my head. Seeing Ash back down, Frieren, clearly pleased, swatted his hand away. Ash felt defeated. He didn't want to admit it, but there was nothing he could do. This elf, who was supposed to be much older than him, could cry for days without shame, and the thought of going through that again exhausted him. Never mind. I'm done with this. I'm going to study. He reluctantly dropped his hand and turned away, clearly frustrated. But Frieren, undeterred by his irritation, followed him, keeping close without bothering to give him any space. After that, the 4 of them stayed in the ruins for about a month before Ash packed his things and left with Frieren and Flam. Naturally, he took a new magic book with him. And as for why he didn't stay, well, there was no choice. Ciri preferred solitude and wouldn't teach anyone no matter how much they begged. On the other hand, Flam was more than willing to share her knowledge, so Ash followed her instead. 3 years later, the group returned to visit Ciri, who had been living alone like an old recluse. Despite the passage of time, Ash's appearance hadn't changed, and people would have grown suspicious, but Ciri took care of that too. She explained it away easily, saying it was the result of an experimental spell of eternal youth that had been cast on him. The spell had only succeeded once, by pure luck, leaving Ash forever youthful. Since the success rate was so low, no one had dared to try again. And with Ciri vouching for him, no one questioned his appearance. As Ash flipped through his collection of books, Updating them, Ciri watched him with amusement from her throne. Finally, she couldn't resist teasing him. Ash, are you really the type of guy who thinks anyone who gives you milk is your mother? I just love knowledge. I'm still your master, aren't I? What does that matter? Flam and Frieren know magic I don't, and they're willing to teach me. I'm willing to learn. It's a win-win. A win-win. It's all for your benefit. Honestly, the seniority here is completely messed up, you idiot. Ciri huffed, grabbing a book and flinging it at him without thinking. Ash caught the book midair, quickly slipping it into his bag. He sighed helplessly, if you don't teach me, what am I supposed to do? I didn't say I wouldn't teach you. I just taught you last time. Can't you wait a little? A little. 50 years. 30 years, maybe. Before that, I want to be alone for a while. Then I might as well look for Flam. It's only 30 years, can't you wait? Only 30 years. Ciri knew he was a demon and didn't care about waiting 30 years, but Ash didn't know how to correct her odd sense of time. Waiting 30 years wasn't something he could just accept easily. Still, Ash realized that arguing wouldn't get anywhere, so he decided to drop the topic. Frieren, standing nearby, said with a serious tone, Ash, you should learn to take things slower. Don't always rush around like master. You act like time is running out, even when nothing's urgent. That's why humans don't live long. I've already told you, these are two completely different things. He really didn't want to continue this conversation, but he couldn't help glaring at Frieren. At that moment, Flam smiled bitterly and added, Frieren, master, you're both elves, so your perspective is different from ours. But it's not that humans move too quickly and shorten their lifespans. It's that our time is limited. We're closer to death than you are, so we can't afford to wait. We have to act faster. I get it, believe me. The only one who doesn't understand here is Frieren, right? Ciri, who had lived through countless eras from the mythological age to now, shook her head while glancing at Frieren. She knew that having lived in a secluded elven village, Frieren wasn't accustomed to dealing with humans or their urgency. Frieren said nothing, not because she agreed, but because she was too lazy to argue. Just like all elves, her understanding of time was vastly different from humans. They could tell humans to wait a little, yet that wait could last decades. Even knowing that the person was a human, elves found it difficult to adjust their views. And from the human side, it was just as hard to understand why the elves took such a leisurely approach. It was simply their nature to never rush, even when it concerned others. After this conversation, which led nowhere, Ash still remained diligent in learning from Flam and Frieren. Despite Ciri's accusations of confusing generations, he even followed them out of the ruins under her speechless gaze. But as Ash was leaving, Ciri called out from a distance, offering some final advice, Ash, I don't care what you do, but don't pick up bad habits from those two. They waste so much time learning useless tricks, like controlling aura to hide their strength from demons. That's impractical. If they'd spent all that time training in other skills, Flam wouldn't need to sneak around hiding here. Focusing on such techniques is inefficient. Don't disappoint me, either. I got it, no need to worry. Ash waved a hand dismissively, not bothering to turn around. That was enough to signal his agreement. While Ash might have brushed Ciri off on other occasions, this time, he found himself leaning more toward her viewpoint. He didn't plan to waste much time mastering aura control. He would practice it just enough to get by in ordinary circumstances. Beyond that, it wasn't worth it. Because, rather than focusing on sneak attacks, Ash preferred the idea of using his time to grow stronger, and then overpower his enemies head-on. Chapter 29, The Goddess's Time and Space Repatriation. ______. Compared to Ash's pursuit of the unknown, Flam had no interest in exploring the ruins and was equally indifferent to treasure hunting. In her opinion, the knowledge she gained from Ciri far surpassed anything the ruins could offer in a lifetime. Instead of wasting time exploring, she focused on realizing her dream, to teach magic to all of humanity. In fact, Flam had resolved that if she couldn't achieve this goal, she wouldn't return to see her mentor, using this promise as a motivator. This was because, compared to the world 500 years after Ash was born, humanity now regarded magic as a technology of demons, with public research into it considered taboo. Before returning to Ciri, Flam had already persuaded the Emperor of the Empire, which ruled most of the continent, to establish education for court magicians. While she took on this monumental task, Ash and Frieren did not participate, instead staying in the imperial capital as guests and sightseeing. Occasionally, Ash would sit in on lessons to consolidate his foundational knowledge. Time passed quickly, with several uneventful years slipping by. Even in the imperial capital, there were no dramatic power struggles at the palace, likely because Flem handled them behind the scenes. Her status in the empire was incredibly high. Even when Ash, lost and trying to find his way, accidentally climbed over a wall and wandered into the emperor's harem, there were no serious consequences. He was simply forbidden from climbing palace walls again and was required to memorize the palace map. Other than that incident, Ash and Frieren spent much of their time sparring against one another, and Ash frequently ventured outside the city, searching for suitable opponents for real combat. On a normal morning, Ash casually pried open Frieren's door. "It's morning already. We agreed to go monster hunting together." "Frieren, wake up." Without mercy, Ash yanked the blanket off her, intent on getting her to fulfill her promise to go hunting outside the city. However, Frieren expertly turned over, her back now facing him. Without even opening her eyes, she pulled out a fresh blanket from beside her bed and draped it over herself. Not only was she in no mood to get up, but she also raised a hand weakly, waving it in protest. "I said, in the afternoon, please, let me sleep another 5 days, 5 days is all I need." "Is that so?" "But, Frieren," Ash sat down on the edge of her bed, pulling the blanket off her again as he gently tried to reason with her. "The imperial city is huge, and the monster territory is far away. If we leave at noon, we'll only be back by midnight. It's better to head out now, don't you think?" "No. You should just kill me. You're so lazy." Watching her pull yet another blanket from the closet and cover herself without even opening her eyes, Ash couldn't help but feel he might have inadvertently enabled some strange new skill of hers. Seeing how reluctant Frieren was, Ash hesitated for a moment and gave up the idea of carrying her away. He shook his head helplessly and turned to leave. Forget it, I'll go by myself. When you wake up, remember to tell Flem that I'm leaving." "Ah. I see. Thank you. Be careful on the road. See you tonight." Until the very end, Frieren did not open her eyes. She just muttered weakly, vague words like sleep talk, then she tightened the quilt around herself and fell asleep again, very content. Ash helped her close the door, and then prepared to leave alone with some regret, but less than 2 minutes after leaving Frieren's room, he suddenly sensed something unusual in the corridor. It was as if the whole world was rejecting him, and even the space around him began to distort inexplicably. "Are you trying to throw me out of this time and space? I thought there was no time limit for traveling through time and space, but is it the origin of the world, or an anti-travel restriction left by the goddess?" Ash had discussed the idea of time traveling with Ciri, so he had some understanding that time travel wasn't impossible in this world. But that right belonged exclusively to the goddess and was monopolized by her. However, after the chaos of the mythological era, the goddess seemed to have left the planet and disappeared without a trace. The only thing left over from that era is the goddess's steel, which still contains the power she sealed inside, and may trigger time travel. But to be honest, he didn't really understand what was going on, but this sensation of rejection felt more like being sent back than being destroyed. In this state, he realized he couldn't stay here much longer, so he drew his sword, intending to leave some information behind. But just as the blade touched the ground, the surrounding space and time distorted abruptly, causing him to vanish from the corridor in the next instant, without even leaving a scratch. At noon, Frieren, who loved staying in bed, finally got up and was about to go to lunch when she noticed. Did Ash go out to practice magic again? She glanced at the empty space next to her but didn't care too much. Ash often went out to practice magic, and sometimes even ventured outside the capital to fight monsters for real combat experience. Flam was aware of this, and wasn't too worried, though he muttered to himself in confusion. But usually, he tells someone. Why? Didn't he tell anyone today? Maybe he told someone at random, and that person forgot. Frieren responded. True. Flam nodded vaguely. She didn't know why, but she felt a bit uneasy. It was at this moment that Frieren suddenly exclaimed, "Ah," remembering that she had heard Ash's voice early in the morning, when she was half asleep and half awake. She also remembered that he had taken her quilt away. But she hadn't been fully awake at the time, so she had completely forgotten about it. As Flam watched, she waved her fork in the air and said, "I remember now, that guy asked me to go monster hunting with him this morning." "Going monster hunting again? Though he's young, he's not weak." "Master, don't worry. He'll be back by himself this evening." "Well, you're probably right." After hearing this, Flam felt a bit more relieved, but for some reason, a lingering feeling of unease still clung to her, refusing to fade. Chapter 30, News. _____________. At first, after hearing Frieren's account, Flam felt a little uneasy, but she wasn't too worried about what might happen. However, for some reason, Ash didn't return the next day. This wasn't completely unusual, sometimes things came up. Though he might get injured, he always came back unharmed in the end. After all, with Ash's strength, there really wasn't much to worry about. But as the third day passed, then the fourth, and even a month, 2 months. They began to think he had suddenly left without saying goodbye. But when they went back to Ciri, they realized he hadn't returned there at all. At Flam's request, the Emperor sent out search parties, but nothing was found. The Empire even investigated everyone named Ash in the country, but no one matched the description. There was no news of him at any of the Empire's checkpoints either. It was as if Ash had evaporated from the face of the earth, vanishing without a trace, leaving no sign of his existence. And just like that, 50 years passed in the blink of an eye. Flam fulfilled her dream, and then died of old age. According to her will, Frieren returned to the unchanged underground ruins, carrying her final note. The world around her continued to change, but this palace filled with books, and the elf girl on the throne, seemed frozen in time, a corner forgotten by the world, quietly watching history unfold, yet remaining completely unchanged from the first time she had seen it. Even Ciri, sitting on her throne, looked no different than before. "Frieren, I thought it was Ash," Ciri remarked, still half reclined on her throne, looking down at the familiar figure below with a hint of sarcasm. "If I'm not mistaken, you hate me. Why have you come here alone? Honestly, I thought we'd never see each other again. Ash is probably dead. Even if he survived, he likely died of old age, like the teacher." "Dead? I see." Frieren's news of both deaths caused Ciri to pause for a moment, but then she smiled. "It's been half a century since you last came here. No news of him at all. So, he's dead, is he? Aren't you sad?" Frieren asked, her expression blank as she stood at the bottom of the stairs. "I only took them on as disciples on a whim," Ciri replied, waving her hand dismissively, making Frieren's note float into the air. Without even looking at it, she asked, "But for you, weren't they the closest people to you? Aren't you sad that both of them are gone?" "Am I sad?" "I don't know," Frieren sighed, feeling hollow as she lowered her head in sorrow and murmured softly, "When I think about it, there's still so much I don't understand about both the teacher and Ash. But if I had agreed to go with him that day, maybe he wouldn't have disappeared so suddenly." "What, are you crying?" "I don't know. I just feel empty inside," Frieren whispered. "I've been thinking about it for the past 50 years, over and over." She hadn't shed tears when she buried Flam. She just couldn't understand why the people around her were crying. But now, Ciri's words made her heart surge with inexplicable emotions, and her eyes became warm. But just as tears flowed down her cheeks for the first time in her life, Ciri, sitting on the throne with one hand on her chin and looking at the suicide note, suddenly said, "Although normally Ash should be dead, my intuition tells me that he is still alive." "Still alive? You know what?" "My instinct." "Then do you know where he is?" "I don't know, it's just intuition, not divination." "Don't you know all kinds of magic? Why can't you tell fortunes?" "I told you last time that that kind of convenient magic is monopolized by that goddess. Even if you know it, it won't be effective." Ciri seemed quite unhappy as she brought this up. But Frieren was completely confused. Can something like that also be monopolized? Just think of it as a huge barrier that covers the entire planet. It'll be easier to understand that way. Just as. What exactly is it? How would I know exactly? If I knew, I would be a god. For some reason, she was called the magician closest to God. However, as for the true realm of God, she had been standing still for thousands of years. Precisely because her strength had stagnated, she spent a lot of time learning various magic and skills. This also included the technique of hiding one's breath, which she herself thought was very impractical, and some strange legendary magic that was very convenient but couldn't be used in combat. It could only clean clothes or produce a floral scent. Is what Ciri said true? Even though there was no evidence, that intuitive answer alone was enough for Frieren. Because Ciri's intuition was almost indistinguishable from magic and was very worthy of recognition, just knowing that Ash was not dead greatly reduced the regret and remorse in her heart. The heavy stone that had been weighing on her heart finally fell, allowing her to leave the ruins and finally sleep in peace after half a century. However, she didn't know whether Ash had died of old age or what. After that, no matter how much time passed, whether it was 100 years, 200 years, or even 300 years, she never met that figure again. Perhaps, after his master's death, he had quietly returned to that distant, unknown hometown and peacefully completed his life's journey amid the laughter of his descendants. Sure, that's right. With a glimmer of hope in her heart, as well as a faint sadness and nostalgia that couldn't be concealed, Frieren couldn't help but pray like this.